open session, and we are on Article 10. We're going to stay in progression as printed in your warrant. So we'll move to Article 10, and I would entertain a motion to waive the reading of Article 10 in its entirety due to its length. So moved. Moved by Mr. Rice, second by Mr. Griffin. All those in favor, show of hands. Down hands, any opposed? All right, we'll move to Article 10. Is there anyone who would like to discuss, open discussion? May I have a motion to open discussion on Article 10? Mr. Zanoy, seconded by Mr. Griffin. Mr. Bamber, would you like to speak to Article 10? Please. Please start us off.
My name is Warren Bambry, 21 Gill Street, and I'm here to point out to the board a couple of errors that have occurred in Article 10 as presented here today and as was presented at the Budget Committee hearing last week. There are a couple of changes that took place and were not discovered until after the meeting of the Budget Committee when a vote had been taken. What it indicated is, I don't know if it's on, can we scroll down to the end of that? Where it's the fiscal impact note is. Can you scroll to the end of that? Oh. Okay. Now, what is printed, I believe that's the same. Fiscal impact note from the Finance Department. This warrant article is for the same purpose and in the same amount as requested and approved in 2009. And that's what we voted for and voted on at the Budget Committee meeting, and it was approved. The next day, it was discovered that the last two items, right above where we're looking now, the transportation assistance for seniors, that actually should be transportation assistance for Seacoast citizens. That's TASC, is the group that I'm involved with. Last year, that amount, as it appears at 1,000 now, was $6,240. And Rockingham Meals on Wheels, a fine program, have nothing against Meals on Wheels.
Mr. Mayor, the audience is letting me know that they can't hear you, so if you could speak closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, I'm mentioning that last year's transportation assistance for Seacoast citizens was $6,240 and showed up on this Article 10 as $1,000. And right underneath that is Rockingham Meals on Wheels for $5,051 that was not on last year's article. And again, if we reference the information that we just read, it indicates it's approved as the same as 2009. So,
Mr. Bamber, let me jump in and see if I can get an answer from the Board of Selectmen.
We're planning on making to amend it by increasing the sum identified as transportation assistance for seniors from $1,000 to $6,400 to correct a typographic error, and by increasing the sum to the appropriated from $172,751 to $178,151, the same as the grand total for all human services appropriations in 2009.
So they picked up on the same thing that you noted, and it's their intention, and you can adopt it as your motion if you like, to increase that line item from 1,000 to 6,240.
absolutely.
Would that be your intention?
Yes.
All right, so you make a motion in that regard?
Yes.
All right, second. So we have
It's
the Banbury amendment to increase the line line item for transportation assistance for Seacoast citizens from 1,000 to 6,240. 6,400. Mr. Bamber had been advised that the number last year was 6,400.
Oh, well, it's fine. I'm sorry.
All
I thought it was-
So the Bamberry amendment is to increase the line item within Article 10 from $1,000 to $6,400, which would then increase the bottom line of Article 10 to $178,151. Mr. Bamber, would you like to speak to the increase, to add anything other than it's just the same amount as last year?
I don't know whether an explanation of what the program is all about.
No.
Your intention is to get it the same level as last year?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else wish to be heard on the Bamberry amendment? Move for a vote. Mr. Gopal?
Art Gopalan, 20 Windmill Lane. I'm kind of confused. Article 27, I think this is last year's book, 2000. It looks to me like the bottom line number is 166,700.
You and I think alike on that one, Mr. Gopal, and I saw the same thing, and what I've been told is that there were two articles in the full warrant that were also service type articles that were approved by the voters that are now embedded in Article 10.
I see.
So you're correct that matching them, they don't equate, but if you add up all of the service articles, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard on the Bamberry amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the Bamberry amendment, please raise your voter card. Down card. Any opposed? I declare the Bamberry amendment has passed, so that Article 10 has been so amended. Anyone else wishing to speak on Article 10? Yes, ma'am.
I live out of town. I'm the director of task. I just want to...
Well, why don't you come on up to the podium and we'll see if the body would like to hear. Would you state your name?
My name is Carol Gullah. I'm the director of task, and I just want to thank Mr.
We have a non-voter. Our rules stated at the outset were that it required an affirmative vote of the...
5 seconds. 5 seconds.
Be addressed by non-voters. All those in favor of having non-voters speak, down cards, any opposed? The podium is yours.
Okay, 30 seconds, I promise. I just want to thank Mr. Bamberry and the residents of Hampton for supporting task. And just to let you know, 2008, we did a little over 500 trips. 2009, we almost doubled it to over 900 trips for Hampton seniors and adults with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 10 as amended? Mr. Meyer.
Gary Meyer, 4 Intercession Way. I'm speaking in favor of this warrant, but I wanted to also point out that the federal government provides some matching funds, and that should this article be approved, with some slight procedural changes, we can work through the New Hampshire Children's Trust to get additional funding from the federal government for programs. So I wanted to mention that and make sure that we don't need to amend it to be able to accept the funds. So it's really a question. Do we have to amend it to be able to apply through the New Hampshire Trust for matching funds?
See if we have an answer to that question.
Mr. Moderator, we do not have to amend it to accomplish that goal.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 10 as amended? Mr. Moody.
This Seacoast visiting nurses in Northampton, $40,000. They merged with an outfit in Lawrence, Mass. Last year, and they added services that we're also paying other organizations for. I'm wondering if this is going to be a double dipping type thing, where we're for instance, Seacoast Hospice. They added a hospice segment.
Does anyone have any information on the dollar figure attributable to the Seacoast visiting nurse line within Article 10?
Mr. Moderator, in answer to your question, they did request the same $40,000 this year. They did merge with another organization from from Massachusetts. And it's my understanding that they do, from the funds received, have a regular support program for other human service agencies that they also support. I don't believe this is a double dip. These people are requesting the same funds they requested in the previous year. So I don't think they're trying to double subsidize, I think is the question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Anyone else on Article 10? Seeing none, Article 10 will appear on the warrant as amended. Article 11, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise the sum of $50,000 for the purpose of providing full larviciding of mosquito breeding areas in the town, including catch basins, and for spraying of adult mosquitoes during the months of June through September 2010. Majority vote required, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. The fiscal impact note from the Finance Department. This warrant article is for the same purpose and the same amount as requested and approved in 2009. Therefore, passage of this article would have no additional impact on the 2010 tax rate. The estimated 2010 tax rate impact is 0.017 per $1,000 of valuation, 1 7/10 $1,000 valuation. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 11.
I'll make that motion.
Roy, seconded by Mr. Griffin. Is there someone who'd like to speak? Ms. Kaiser.
Hi, Ann Kaiser, 7 Palmer Street, also a member of the Hampton Mosquito Control Commission. I want you to support this article, but I'm going to, in interests of full disclosure, let you know that this is not the entire budget that the town has to spend for controlling mosquitoes. There is $60,000 already in the budget. That has been there since we first started default budgets, and the amount for the adulticiding was removed by the Board of Selectmen. This figure of $50,000 for the warrant article means that our budget will remain the same as it has for the last 2 years. So it not only includes the mosquito control, but it also includes the monies needed to place those greenhead fly traps out on the marsh every summer. So I'd like your support on voting for this $50,000. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 11? Seeing none, Article 11 will appear on the warrant as printed. Article 12, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $340,000 to be placed in the Department of Public Works Equipment Capital Reserve Fund created under Article 23 of the 2008 Annual Town Meeting in accordance with the provisions of RSA 35. This sum of $340,000 to come from the unexpended fund balance surplus as of December 31, 2009, and no amount to be raised from taxation. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 12. Moved by Mr. Lally, seconded by Mr. Nichols. Is there someone who would like to speak to Article 12? Mr. Price.
Mr. Moderator? Mr. Moderator, I'm John Price. I'm the Public Works Director here in the town of Hampton. Last year, we were able to purchase one sidewalk plow and one brand-new sweeper for the community. The sweeper, when we put out the specifications, it was to conform with the new regulations, Stormwater 2, by the federal government. So we think we've covered ourselves a little bit there. And this year, we're looking to, out of this funds, to pick up a router for the storm drains and 2 plows with wings on them, which will take us almost up to the $340,000.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 12? Mr. Warburg.
Mr. Moderator, Brian Warburton, 24 Sanborn Road. I'm going to ask the same question that I've asked the last couple of years, and I have yet to get an answer. But before I do that, in 1996, in that time frame, the Board of Selectmen established these funds, the capital reserve funds, for public works to do things such as road improvements and other things. When they came every year, we came to the voters to ask for, at the time, it was a regular $350,000 to be put into the fund. That fund was built up, and it was the ensuing years that that money was taken out. And I have to tell you that like this whole shell game we're being played with this budget, because I don't understand half the time we hear we got extra money hanging around here and there. This article says, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $340,000 to be placed in Department of Works Equipment Capital Reserve Fund? Then it goes on, it says to take out the sum of $340,000. Can I ask through you, Mr. Moderator, through Town Manager Welch or whoever chooses to answer, is this a legal requirement that has changed the stature of how we do this article, or is this another example of confusing the public on all this extra money and now we're asking them for more?
Is there anyone on the board who can address Mr. Warburton's question?
Mr. Moderator? Mr. Welch. The Department of Revenue specifically requires us to place in the warrant article the raise and appropriate. That's to authorize the funding and to authorize the expenditure. And where these funds are coming from surplus, they require us to use this language so that we can designate that those funds will actually be transferred from the so-called surplus to fund this appropriation. That's all we're doing here. This fund was established in 2008 and under Article 23, and we're looking to fund again this in the 2010 year. There's no double appropriation. We're taking $340,000 from the undesignated fund balance and putting it into this surplus, and that's the intent. The DRA wants us to write it like this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warburton. Anyone else wishing to be heard on this article? Ms. Woolsey.
May I offer an amendment, Mr. Moderator? Just for purposes basically of public disclosure. Let me hand. The little parenthetical note at the bottom of this article says no tax rate impact. The tax rate impact has already occurred, so I'm moving to amend the parenthetical section to say that the tax rate impact has already been felt by the taxpayers.
Where was the second? Who was the second? Thank you. We have a motion, an amendment by Ms. Woolsey, seconded by Mr. Warburton, to change the parenthetical on Article 12. And in this instance, Ms. Woolsey, I would state that this is not actually a finance impact note. It appears in the body of the warrant article. So Ms. Woolsey has an amendment which would delete no tax rate impact and replace with the tax rate impact has already occurred. Would anyone like to speak to that? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your voter card. Down card. All opposed? Okay. The Article 12 has been amended. The Woolsey amendment has passed. Is there any further discussion on Article 12? Mr. Moody. And before you take the podium, Mr. Moody, no, you can have the podium. It's just a technical issue. The town clerk, who keeps the records of the meeting, is having difficulty hearing the speakers. It's been a challenging day from an audio standpoint, so I'm simply passing on the request to all speakers that when you come to the podium, if you can make sure you project into the microphone so the town clerk can take down your comments. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Just a note on those parenthetical additions. Senate Bill 2 law doesn't allow any of those. Speaking to this issue, it just seemed the other day that we spent $100,000 on a sweeper. What happened to that sweeper?
Mr. Price, would you like to address Mr. Moody's question?
Mr. Moody, pardon me?
We're either going to have to put you down on the floor. Okay, let's take a break then, because we can't, if we're not set up correctly, then we're going to have to modify it. Okay?
We're going to take a break here to allow the clerk to move, or to move the paraphernalia closer.
It appears from the people talking from this viewpoint that they're not talking close enough to the speakers. They're just got their head back. They try not to.
I don't. Be right in the middle there.
One, two. 1, 2. One of the problems is when you people come up and speak, you're speaking with your little soft voices. You can't hear me back here? Brian, bring that level up a little. Just a notch. But I can hear me. Can you hear it now? But we're still getting some feedback, and we don't understand that. See, there we go with the feedback. So
Christina just said they're moving the speaker back, and I could hear up there when the speaker was behind us. All right, he's moving the speaker back. Go right back here.
I need to have somebody at the microphone. I think that's your real issue.
Testing 1, 2. Can you hear it? Testing 1, 2.
That's the finance director of
Exit
Oz.
stage left, he's doing stage direction.
That's the guy from Oz, behind the curtain. In real life, I'm a lot shorter. I put another one of those buzzers on your coat, so next time you try to run away, I'm going to...
That is showing.
Which is 15. This lady over here.
Yeah.
We ready to resume?
No, I knew it wouldn't pass. Yeah, it's too close.
Okay, before we broke for some technical adjustments, Mr. Moody at the podium and had asked a question about a sweeper, the purchase of a sweeper, and Mr. Price, Director of Public Works, has the podium to address Mr. Moody's question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The sweeper that we had was is about 10 years old. We bought it used, and it's rusting out, plus the fact that it does not meet the stormwater requirements under the new regulations from the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 12 as amended? Seeing none, Article 12 will appear on the warrant as amended. Article 13. Shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $300,000 for the purpose of making road improvements and authorize the withdrawal of $40,000 from the Road Improvement Capital Reserve Fund created under Article 16 of the 1998 annual town meeting created for this purpose, and to fund the balance of the appropriation by a transfer of $260,000 from the unexpended fund balance, surplus, as of December 31, 2009, and no amount to be raised from taxation for the improvement of Dearborn Avenue, Academy Avenue, Levitt Road, Fairfield Drive, Ruth Lane, Belmont Circle, Munsey Drive, and Morningside Drive to include street repairs, reconstruction, and associated materials and labor necessary to do the work, and also to include associated drainage system maintenance, upgrades, and improvements. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 13, moved by Mr. Zanoy. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Griffin. Mr. Price, do you wish to speak to Article 13?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Part of the roads have been part of the motion. We have just, the town has just gone through a assessment of the roads in the town, and the professional engineering firm that was hired has come up with a list of roads that need to be done. These roads that we have here, except for Morningside Drive, are below the accepted level by that professional firm. Morningside Drive is being added to the list this year, as we have just put in sewer and drains in the last year and a half. So this is to take care of that trench that's going down the middle of the road.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 13? Ms. Woolsey.
Mr. Moderator, you have a copy of my amendment, which is the same as for Article 12 on the parenthetical reference of no tax rate impact. Once again, the tax rate impact has already occurred.
Is that an amendment for this article, Ms. Woolsey? Then I need you to...
I wrote it on the slip I gave you. You have both. I put Article 12 and Article 13.
Article 13?
Identical.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought it was just submitted on Article 12. Seconded by Mr. Plouffe. Okay. Do you wish to make any further comment on that amendment, Ms. Woolsey? Any further comment?
Self-explanatory.
Okay. Any discussion on the Woolsey amendment, which is to delete the parenthetical no tax rate impact and replace with tax impact has already occurred? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the Woolsey amendment, raise your voter card. Down card. All opposed? I declare the Woolsey amendment has passed. Is there any further discussion on Article 13 as amended? Mr. Gopal.
A couple of items, Art Gopal, 20 Windmill Lane. Article 13 is similar to the article that was proposed last year and perhaps year before on several of the streets. One of the things that Mr. Price hasn't addressed, I think he's being too modest, is that whether these items have been completed so that the voters will know that these monies that are appropriated are spent addressing what was previously identified as items that needed to be addressed. In this regard, I want to take a little bit of a moment and talk about the public works. I think that Mr. Price is doing an excellent job simply because, as I said, I take walk every day, and I see him constantly with his crew and so forth. And I've also helped Mr. Gephardt lay a sidewalk on the beach, and Mr. Price has been very, very responsive. And on top of that, I think there was an issue that was raised prior that he turned over $600,000 or whatever. That represents real operating efficiency. It is not because that he didn't do the job that was turned over. And let's stop maligning people on that basis. If they operate effectively, we must acknowledge it and encourage it, and that's how we manage the business. We don't manage the business by cutting out stuff so that it would look good. With regard to this article, moderator, that I want to point out that I lived on 20 Windmill Lane, and on my road I've lived since 1984. I have not seen one bit of repair, not that I'm saying that it requires, or perhaps I'm not a good judge of it, but it was on one of these articles years past, but I don't believe that it has been done. So I think I would appreciate if Mr. Price gives a little bit of an overview of what was accomplished last year. Perhaps it's in the upcoming yearbook, but it would help the voters to realize that all the job that has been put in front of him last year was accommodated or was done, completed.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. Mr. Price, can you address Mr. Gopalan's question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Capel, thank you for your kind words, but I can't take the credit for all of it because I have a wonderful department, and the people down there are becoming very, very dedicated to their positions, and that's one of the reasons why we were able to save the funds that we were. The streets that we did, and I'm going to have to talk off the top of my head because I don't have it with me. It's up in the back of the room. Dumas, Cliff, Toll Farm, Toll Avenue, what was the other? Sunset Avenue, were the roads that were done, to the best of my knowledge, right here. I can give you that information. It's part of the report that I have submitted to the town for the annual report.
Thank you, Mr. Price.
Excuse me. Yep. And I might say that we overexpended that by about $6,000, so we took it out of one of the other accounts, but that's what we were able to do this year.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Moody, you wish to be heard on this article?
I was impressed by the projects this fall, the road overlay and reconstruction. There actually was some reconstruction, which was the original purpose of this capital reserve fund in the late 90s, was reconstruction of town roads, not for filling in trenches or for overlay. But the town manager, Barrington, changed the wording to making road improvements. And that's the way it's stuck. So some of these are just overlays, like Toll Avenue, which I felt that didn't need doing at all. Dearborn Avenue was on the list last year and dearly needs it. And it's now on the list again. Academy Avenue, I don't think needs it. Levitt Road, you just replaced the sewer, so I imagine that's a trench thing too. Muncie Drive, I didn't really realize that was that old, that road. But it's quite a project. every year, except those years that we vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 13 as amended? Seeing none, Article 13 will appear on the warrant as amended. Article 14, shall the town of Hampton vote to...
Moderator?
Restrict reconsideration?
Mr. Nichols has made a motion to restrict reconsideration of Articles 10 through 13. Is there a second to Mr. Nichols? Seconded by Mr. Zanoy. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration on 10 through 13, raise your voter card, down card. Any opposed? I declare Articles 10 through 13 have been restricted from further consideration. Article 14, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $177,000 representing the balance to be remaining to be appropriated from the special revenue fund created by Article 41 of the 1996 town meeting, and to close such account for the purpose of town-owned infrastructure within the Hampton Village district boundaries, but rescinded by Article 45 of the March 13, 2007 town meeting for the purpose of installing new decorative street lighting in Hampton Beach on the lettered streets beginning at A Street, including all engineering, design, procurement, shipping, delivery, and installation costs together with all related appurtenances and activities necessary or desirable to complete the purpose of this article. Majority vote required, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. This infrastructure item has been duly determined by the precinct commissioners, Public Works Director, and the town manager on December 18, 2009. This will be town-owned infrastructure. Adoption of this article of no effect on the town's tax rate, parentheses, no tax rate impact, end parentheses. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 14. Moved by Mr. Griffin, seconded by Mr. Zanoy. Mr. Griffin, do you care to speak to the article?
Well, I just would like to say that this money is already sitting there and waiting. Last year, I believe it was defeated, but this money is sitting there, and it was supposed to be for this to begin with, and the Board of Selectmen does recommend this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Ray.
Thank you. Chuck Rage, 121 Ocean Boulevard. I just want to stress that the lighting at the beach has already, we've already spent close to $500,000 on the infrastructure, and by not passing this, that money will be wasted. This has to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rage. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Mr. Rainier.
Richard Rainier, 29 Highland Ave. At the risk of being repetitious of some of the comments that have made, I do have a couple of points that I would like to get across. As you know, the primary source of revenue to operate the town is from property taxes. But over the years, as we've developed different programs, it was found that some of these programs could be somewhat self-supporting by generating income for services rendered. For instance, the Town Recreation Department, there are certain recreational activities that take place that people contribute to pay for those activities, and the money is generated into a special revenue fund, so they become somewhat self-supporting. The TV Origination Fund is 100% supported by revenue from a percentage of the revenue that comes in from Comcast. What we're looking at here is basically the same thing. In 1996, through a town meeting vote, there was a special revenue fund established to improve infrastructure, town-owned infrastructure within the Hampton Beach Village district boundaries. Unfortunately, we've lost that revenue fund over the past couple of years, but there is right now $177,000 sitting in that fund. And that's what this article does. It's to take money that is in the fund and use it for improvements of decorative lights along Ashworth Ave and the leaded streets. I know when you look at some of these articles, when you see the words raise and appropriate, I think that kind of scares some people. Because right off the bat, you think, oh my God, they're going to get into my pocket and raise my taxes by raising and appropriate. But the terminology is necessary, as I'm sure everybody agrees, that the terminology is necessary for the putting forward of these type of articles. So all I'm asking for is that, the money is there, there's $177,000. We're about to embark on a major reconstruction of the beach with a new seashell complex. And if you look back at what's happened in the past couple of years, the improvements along Ashworth Ave with the sidewalks and the new improvements that have gone down there, the enhancement of decorative lights along that area will really bring the beach up to what it really should be and what we hopefully will all see. So I am urging the voters to vote for this article, and let's move forward and use that money for what it was designated for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rainier. Mr. Rice.
Fred Rice, 15 Heather Lane. When this account, this special fund was set up in 1996, it was done for the express purpose of using the monies that tourists from out of state or from elsewhere spend in this town for their parking, and to use a portion of that to improve and maintain the very facilities that they are the cause of wearing down. It wasn't intended for any other purpose at any time. And that was a good one. It was a hard battle to get that thing put in, and then we started using it, and we got some very good things done with that money. And it was all money generated from tourists that goes back into the beach to improve it. Well, a couple of years ago, on what may go down in history as one of the dumbest warrant articles ever passed in this town, that money was transferred to the Parks and Rec Department. I've got nothing against Parks and Rec. They need money. They should have gotten the money for their tennis courts elsewhere, but a well-intentioned beach resident decided that we should take this parking revenue, and to heck with improving the area down where he lived, down in the beach, let's send it uptown. And we're using that again this year. And that was wrong to do that. But it is what it is, and the new fund that those monies are in are used for Parks and Recreation now. This article right here is a good one, because it finally will allow us to release this money and use it for its original intended purpose, i.e. the improvement of infrastructure. Remember, they've already got half of the cost of the street lighting along Ashworth Avenue already spent. It was put in when the infrastructure project was put in a couple of years ago. This is to finish that job off as part of the rest of the improvement of the infrastructure at Hampton Beach. It is an excellent article. I think it's a good purpose for it. I would like, however, to make an amendment, and that is to change the amount to be raised and appropriated from $177,000 to $176,999 and leave $1 in that account. And then also to delete the words "and to close such account." It isn't easy to establish these accounts. We've got to go through a lot of rigmarole. By merely keeping $1 in there and keeping the account open, at some point in the future, if we ever get smart enough to use that parking revenue from the beach for the right thing again, we've already got the account there and all we have to do is put the money into it. It doesn't make any sense to close out this account completely. Leave the door open so that we will have a vehicle to use at some time in the future without having to go through a long process of getting it back on the ballot again and all this other, and justifying it all over. We've already justified. We know what it was for. It was misused a couple of years ago in error, and the person who recommended that warrant article has agreed, gee, I didn't really intend to do that, and people were confused by it. Well, let's not get ourselves confused and wrapped around the axle again. So I have the wording on this, Mr. Moderator. It would be to change the amount, reduce it by $1, and also to delete the words "and to close such account."
Is there a second to Mr. Rice's amendment? Second. Seconded by Mr. Guthrie.
Bob? I would like the town's finance director to comment on this.
Yeah, let's just get the amendment up on the screen, please. Is there anything else you need to put up? There's you change the dollar amount and also... Okay, all right. Mr. Schweitzer?
I understand the intent is to keep open the account. You're hearing that we need to do a town vote on this one. This article, or this account, was always set up to have a town meeting vote to spend anything from it. To leave $1 in an account makes somewhat sense, but you're still going to need to do anything to this account, you're going to have a town meeting vote. Setting up a new special revenue fund is literally me typing in the name of the account. That's very easy. Additionally, this would take care of one headache, which you people don't realize, is that I actually have two accounts that are called beach infrastructure. One is this one, which is the money coming from that fund, and the other one was the money that was used to do the infrastructure project several years ago. So therefore, I understand the intent, but since you're going to have to come back to town meeting anyway, I'd really recommend, personally, not to do this.
Will we not run into the difficulty that we always do in establishing a new account or whatever, that it has to be re-researched and rediscussed ad nauseum before we can get the thing put in? Is it just as simple as typing in a line and we've created a fund?
To establish a fund for, boom, done.
I want to make sure that we can easily do this at some point in the future. I don't expect it's going to be done this year or maybe even next. But I would hope that we would have the mechanism ready-made right there to put money into should we decide to raise and appropriate it and put it in there.
Setting up the fund for the accounting is very simple. It's just a piece of the language within the warrant article. Right now, doing this doesn't do anything really, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. If that be the case, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Mr. Guthrie, you withdraw your second? The amendment and the second have been withdrawn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moody, do you care to speak to Article 14?
I rise to a point of order, Mr. Moderator, which, as you realize, is a one-person motion. This article is not in format required by the statute for that special revenue fund, RSA 3195C, which is a fill-in-the-blanks type statute. It does not conform to the statute, and therefore it is illegal.
Is there anyone on the board who wishes to address Mr. Moody's point relative to the phrasing in comparison to 3195C? I know in the past that we have dealt with issues relative to maintaining strict compliance with phrasing in this area. I don't know whether it's a different issue because the money is already there.
Well, this is neither creating nor rescinding the fund.
Okay.
It is to expend money that's already there.
So the town attorney has stated that it's because of the particular purpose of the article that the article need not cling to that statutory language. Is that correct?
Correct.
We can't really hear, and I'm in the front row. It's hard to hear.
What he's saying is that we're not establishing or appropriating more money, continuing that 20% thing. We're just spending what's in there. But still, every time we've ever spent out of this special revenue fund, it's been in the format of that statute. That special revenue statute gives a format, exact wording, where you fill in the blanks.
So point taken, Mr. Moody, on the language not being consistent with 3195C. You've heard the town attorney's opinion on why it doesn't.
So you have acquiesced?
Not so much acquiesced. I don't believe it's my role as moderator to make that determination as to whether the article can go forward or not. I think what will happen is with any article that has defective or faulty language, it won't be able to be implemented if, in fact, it is voted in the affirmative by the voters.
Well, up until last year, that little thing about having a committee decide, which was dominated by 3 precinct commissioners for town funds, they never went to that little committee when they appropriated all those hundreds of thousands of dollars. They petitioned, the precinct people petitioned town meeting and bypassed that. The last 2 years have been the only 2 years that the selectmen have put the article in. And last year was defeated, as well as an attempt to recreate the precinct infrastructure, parking lot revenue, and that was defeated. Now, what really this should go to is the infrastructure bond issues. Pay off the debt of 12 million plus, what, 8 million in interest and 6 million police station. That's what that $177,000 should go for, which is infrastructure in the precinct. I am not in favor of spending 1 cent in the precinct as long as that precinct wants its own zoning, in which they will dictate town services levels, which we would have no say of how high a building is, and so forth, and how big the aerial ladder truck has to be. And I will vote against every infrastructure in the village district until that is defeated in the legislature.
Okay. We have your
as
opinion
far
on-
as these accent lights are concerned, A Street, does it mention? Beginning at A Street, that means you're going to have to tear up our new concrete sidewalks to put these wirings in.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Ms. Woolsey, and then Mr. Rainier.
Mr. Moderator, I am concerned in the context that we in the audience and the voters are not constitutional scholars, nor are we sufficiently conversant with the RSAs to understand the legality of an article placed on the warrant. But I have a problem with articles being put before the public to vote on that turn out to not be accurate.
We aren't there, Ms. Woolsey. We have a voter who has an opinion about whether it is or not. It's been expressed. He's cast doubt on the legality of it. Mm-hmm. But you are correct. We are not here today to render pass muster constitutionally on the article or not. That was my only point.
But we rely, unfortunately, it appears, on the individuals who structure these articles coming before us, because I think I, as an individual voter, have a right to believe that what I'm voting on is valid and structured in a proper manner.
And that would be my belief as well. Mr. Rainier.
Mr. Moody's remarks on the possibility or the perception that there may be a planning board at the beach is totally irrelevant about this article. The second point that he made about tearing up sidewalks, the point is that the infrastructure is already there. The conduits are on the ground, the pads are installed, there will not be any rip-up of any of the concrete sidewalks, so I dispute his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Rainier. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 14?
Moderator.
Mr. Griffin, then Mr. Lally. Mr. Griffin.
Ms. Woolsey's comments.
Can't hear you.
We have a town manager and town attorney that I think between them have about 6. Can you hear me now? No.
I think your batteries are out.
He just changed the battery.
Here, do you want to use mine?
How's this working? Between them, they have, I believe, probably 60 years of experience, whether it be in town management, municipal law, and so forth. So I think because someone, and Mr. Moody, his opinion, certainly has a right to come up and give his opinion. He's a former selectman, and in his own right has much municipal background as anybody in this room, so I respect his opinion. But I want the people in the audience to know, and the people at home, that we as selectmen respect the opinions of, when these are written by our town manager and town attorney and legal counsel, that I have every ounce of faith that when we bring these articles in before you, that they are indeed as totally complete and competent as we would expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lally. Mr. Griffin.
Yes, I also just wanted to reiterate that those street lights and whatever is the lighting there has all been put in. It was put in right from the very beginning. The Board of Selectmen expected it to go like in a phase. The first phase has already been completed, and we expected that this lighting project would be finished. So
Thank you,
this,
Mr.
I'm
Griffin.
in favor of this.
Mr. Zanoy.
Yeah, the money has been raised legitimately. It was at a time when 20% of the beach precinct parking fees were going to the precinct. The money's there, it's collecting interest, it's been raised legitimately, it should go to finish the job on the beach as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Zanoy. Mr. Moody, anything new and different to add on this article?
I'm curious as to why the Budget Committee recommended this when 2 years ago the same purpose they did not recommend it, not recommended by the Budget Committee. Now, all I can say is that we heard that the Ashworth Avenue infrastructure for the lights were installed, but the last time that this was discussed, there still had to be some inroads into the sidewalks on A to Q Street. That's the last time it was discussed. One other comment is it seems that when one gets advice from a lawyer, it's called a legal opinion. But when one gets advice from a layman, it's just an opinion.
Two opinions duly noted by the body relative to the validity of this article.
Just for interest's sake, the quoting language that Mr. Moody was looking at is in RSA 31:95-D, which is under procedure for adoption. And under 3195-D, Roman 1, small c, there's some very specific wording. Shall we adopt the provisions to restrict revenues to expenditures and so forth? And there's also, it indicates that the same language is to be used when you rescind. But when there's money in the fund, even after it's rescinded, there's another section, 31:95C, Special Revenue Funds, Roman 3, which says any surplus in any fund created under paragraph 1 or 2 shall not be deemed part of the general fund accumulated surplus, nor shall any surplus be expended for any purpose or transferred to any appropriation until such time as the legislative body shall have voted to appropriate a specific amount from said fund for a specific purpose related to the purpose or source of the revenue. This does not require specific quoted language.
Thank you. So Mr. Moody and Mr. Gerald have both cited that same statutory section. They obviously have differing opinions, but the legislative body is the voters, and the voters get to decide on the merits of this on March 9th. So if there's no further discussion, we'll await further action on that article till March 9th. And we're on to Article 15. Shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $150,000 for the purpose of constructing a salt storage shed at the Department of Public Works yard, including all engineering, design, procurement, construction, shipping, delivery, and training costs, together with all appurtenances necessary to complete the project, and to fund this appropriation by a transfer of $150,000 from the unexpended fund balance surplus as of December 31, 2009, and no amount to be raised from taxation. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact. Recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 15, moved by Mr. Nichols.
And second.
Seconded by Mr. Bateman. Mr. Nichols, do you care to speak to this?
Yes, I would. The subject of a salt shed has come up a couple of times in recent years, and on both occasions it was turned down by the voters.
Mr. Nichols, the room is having difficulty hearing you.
Okay. Is that any better?
If he needs this, I've got this.
Okay. Subject has come up and been turned down by the voters, I believe, at least 2 times in the last 3, 4, 5 years. On both those articles, I believe the amount was something in the neighborhood of $225,000 From speaking with people, what I found was people were more concerned with the amount of money involved with it than they were with the purpose. I think people understood that there was a need to address the environmental issues associated with the way we currently store salt. I think they also understood the availability issues and the need to make sure that we don't run out. I worked with a combination of John Price and Fred and John's engineer, and basically the approach that we took was, rather than trying to store an entire season's worth of salt, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 tons, we looked at storing half of it, storing half a season's salt, which is what this current proposal, the design behind this current amount proposed, would store 3 to 4 times the 200 tons that we can currently store. I think we've done a pretty good job by managing getting deliveries quickly as we run low with 200 tons. So I think we all came to the conclusion that with 600 or 700 tons, we should have no problem at all of assuring that we don't run out. As far as the cost, while there are some cost advantages in the long term to a larger shed, you don't hit a break-even point on the $225,000 shed versus the $150,000 shed until you're 20 years out. There's a savings roughly of about $4,000 a year with a cost differential of $75,000 or $100,000. I believed that if we went forward with another $225,000 shed, that we would probably be turned down, and thus the proposal you see is for $150,000. There is a document which gives a little bit more specifics than I have, and I'm sure if you got in touch with John Price, he'd be happy to give you a copy.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I believe there are copies of that material in the hall for those who are interested. Ms. Sanfey.
My name is Diandra Sanfey, 34 Langdale Drive. On the salt shed, I would like to make a proposal to increase the funds to $185,000 from $150,000. That is an increase of $35,000. That money, I believe, would have to be raised and appropriated by the town on this warrant article, so the language would have to change. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we would need a second on that motion to amend. Is there any second on the Sanfey proposal?
I'd like to hear some rationale so that we can figure out whether it's worth a second or not.
I need a second to get it on the floor. Second by Mr. Rice. Ms. Sanfey, would you care to speak to the proposal?
Thank you. As Mr. Nichols had said, the town of Hampton had previously requested voters to vote in favor of building a new salt shed in the amount of $225,000, and that vote had failed. Going in, looking at the EPA and the environmental contamination regulations that a salt shed that we currently have, which if you look at the pamphlet that was given out, you can see on the back the Figure 1, front of the salt shed, Figure 2, the broken joists, and Figure 3 as well as broken joists, and then Figure 4 shows you the corrosion from the salt. The EPA has a minimum fine of $25,000 a day to a maximum of $125,000 a day. Over time, if we were to have a fine placed upon us in the town of Hampton, it would normally take about 30 days to deconstruct the current salt shed that we have. And if we were being charged $25,000 a day over 1 month, that would be $750,000. At the maximum of $125,000 a day, it would be $3,750,000 a month. I don't want to see the salt shed being built halfway and just for half of the amount that we can store there. I think that we need to look at the long run, look in the long run of this, and to see that building it properly, building it to the larger size, and the $180,000, the figure that I've given you, comes in line with towns in the area that are the same size as Hampton, use about the same amount of sand and salt and store it. And their costs were in around $185,000 to construct the same type of facility that would hold the capacity that we need. So I would ask you to please consider that, consider that we are in violation and that we could be held by the state, the EPA, in violation, and that we're looking at $185,000 to possibly $125,000 a day if we don't construct this and have it done properly.
Thank you, Ms. Sanfi. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the Sanfi amendment, which is increasing Article 15 by $35,000 to the sum of $185,000? Anyone else wishing to speak to the Sanfi amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of the Sanfi amendment, increasing the amount to $185,000, raise your voter card. Down card, please. All those opposed? I declare the amendment has been defeated. The article remains at $150,000. Ms. Woolsey, would you like to speak to the article?
Same amendment. Tax rate impact has already occurred.
Do I have a second to Ms. Woolsey's proposed amendment? Seconded by Mr. Plouffe. The Woolsey amendment is to take the parenthetical at the end of Article 15 and delete it and insert as a parenthetical, tax rate impact has already occurred. Mr. Plouffe. Would anyone care to speak to the Woolsey amendment? And this is just on the parenthetical. We're going to talk parentheses. Mr. Meyer.
This is Gary Meyer, for Nersessian. I guess I'm just curious, in the case where this warrant, the money actually hasn't been spent. I know there's no tax. We've been taxed on it. Okay, that's it.
Anyone further on the Woolsey amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of the Woolsey amendment, raise your voter cards, please. Down cards. All opposed? I declare the Woolsey amendment has passed and Article 15 has been amended. Mr. Webb, would you like to speak to Article 15?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's been a long time since I got a call from John Hangian saying, hey, we've received a letter from the EPA, a directive that we have certain qualifications that we have to meet on a salt shed. We knew instantly that our salt shed did not meet those recommendations. I congratulate Richard Nichols and John Price for the work that they have done in preparation of this article. Some of you probably are confused because in the past we offered an article dealing with a large-size salt shed that would house salt for 1 year. We put that forward because of the fact that the return, or the break-even point on savings was 8 years. With the economy change, that has changed now to 20 years. So it doesn't make sense to look at a break-even point. I am concerned with one main item as to way the proposal has materialized. We have discussed the size, we have discussed the need, we have presented all that information to the public. But I don't think one thing has gotten across, and I think that's the most important item. Because I think everyone would agree that as far as salt shed is concerned, yeah, we can leave salt the way we have been if it wasn't for the EPA ruling. EPA works in such a way that they issue their regulations, and then they come back and they do a series of inspections. And I compliment the town manager, I compliment John Hangian, and I compliment John Price in the fact that they have properly given excuses
to the EPA as to why we have not implemented or put in a salt shed that equals the requirements. The EPA will come back several times, do several inspections, which they have, but eventually they'll come back and say, hey, tomorrow, and here is the letter, you're going to start paying the $125,000. Now, I've heard arguments from some of you that, well, we just put it off, we don't pay it. Well, I had the experience in the town of Greenwich of them coming back and saying, here's a letter for $1 million. Same EPA office, we were governed out of Boston. And we took it to court. We said, this is too much. Court came back. We ended up paying the court fees because we lost, and paying EPA. And $125,000 a day. Just think, in 2 days, you would have paid more than the amount that you're paying to build the salt shed. So I think to save the town money, not take the chance of the EPA coming back and finding us during this next year, they are eventually going to find us if we don't put a salt shed in. Build that salt shed now. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 15 before Ms. Sanfey, who's already addressed it? Is there anyone new who wishes to be heard on, I believe you've spoken to the article as well, Mr. Meyer? Mr. Page?
Nathan Page, Drakeside Road, and also you're the chairman of your Conservation Commission. The salt shed, the current location of the existing one is not very good environmentally, but the new location is going to be over by the brush pile, I understand, much further away from the marsh, and it should be a lot more environmentally friendly than what we currently have. And I'm supporting that because of that purpose only. It's the further we get the salt away from the marsh, even though it's a salt marsh, it needs to be away from it. It's kind of rhetorical, but we can't get the salt in the salt marsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Ms. Sanfey?
I think it's very important, the information that was given, that people take this very seriously. There is only a certain amount of times that the EPA is going to come back and listen to excuses and or hear reasons why it has not been done before they start giving us these fines. To have to take on these fines, we're going to be paying for more than a shed. Like I said, it's about 30 days to deconstruct the original shed, is what I have learned from the EPA, that is removing the sand, taking away all of the building where it is currently located, checking the ground for the leaching of the salt, and having this money that we would be fined, like I said, anywhere from $25,000 is the minimum, a maximum of $125,000 a day. And to not do this, and go ahead and at least look at this and say, we need to get this done. We are going to eventually run out of chances, and we are going to be fined. I really would like to support this article and get this done and not keep putting it off as we've done in the past, because eventually, like I said, our time will run out and we will not be saving anything. We will be paying a lot of money, and that will be on your tax bill.
Thank you, Ms. Sanfey. Mr. Meyer, and then we're going to move this question.
Okay. Thank you. Gary Meyer, for Intercession. I know that everyone is well-intentioned. I know you've heard a lot of people speaking to concerns that could be valid concerns, but there's a couple of things I want to talk about. There are really three reasons for building a salt shed. One is to save money. The second is to protect our environment. And the third is to make sure we have an adequate supply so we don't run out and have a safety issue on our roads. On the savings, the only way you can save money on your salt, or the main way you save money on your salt, is to get more salt and less water. So if you buy salt and the salt comes with 3% water, you're paying good money for water. Nobody wants to do that. The way to eliminate this waste on salt is to get the state. We purchase all of our salt under a state contract, and in the state contract there is a stipulation for all the salt that's delivered to the Department of Transportation in the state that says each district shall take a mixed sample from the day's total deliveries. Said sample shall be representative of the gradation and moisture content of all salt delivered to a location on that day. Bonuses and penalties, if any, will be assessed against the accumulated and mixed samples of each day's delivery to each location. And then there's a section in the appendix that deals with the actual amounts, and they can be substantial. There can be a 13 to 15% penalty against the vendor who delivers salt for delivering salt that doesn't meet standards. There's one problem with this purchasing contract this year, and that problem is what I read to you on inspections only applies to New Hampshire DOT. Now, I've suggested, and I would suggest that working through our state reps, that they go back to the state of New Hampshire and adjust the language so it says each party or group of parties at their option.
Mr. Meyer, I got to get you to stick on whether the town of Hampton should build a salt shed.
So number one is the evidence, the preponderance of evidence is that we will be spending more money if we build this salt shed. We will not save any money. There is no evidence that we save any money on purchasing salt because the town has never measured, to my knowledge, the quantity of water in the salt that they purchase in the summer versus the winter. That's number one. The price of salt is determined based on a state contract. It is a fixed price all year over the term of the contract. If the town chooses to put a purchase in for the quantity of salt it needs for the season, it can purchase the salt and have it delivered when it needs it. That's number two on the financial side.
So, Mr. Meyer, you've heard the suggestion. You articulated several points. Why don't you wrap up here, let the folks know whether you're in favor of it or against it, and then we're going to move the question.
Okay, let me just leave with the last thought is the issue of the environment. I think the environment is important, and I would encourage the town to to make remedial. There's actually a process where you put in a ditch and a drainage area, so you collect the runoff from the existing area, so we avoid EPA fines. The EPA does not require a salt shed. It requires that you prevent salt leaching into the groundwater.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Meyer.
you.
All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next article, and unless I hear or see... Yes.
I would like to make a motion to restrict reconsideration on, I believe, Articles 14 and
15.
There's been a motion by Mr. Nichols to restrict reconsideration of Articles 14 and 15. All in favor? Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Lally. All those in favor restricting reconsideration on 14 and 15? Down cards. Any opposed? 14 and 15 are restricted from further consideration. We're on to number 16. Shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $100,000 from revenues generated from the Hampton TV Origination Fund, a special revenue fund created by Article 21 of the 2000 annual town meeting and funded by revenues generated from the Cable TV Local Origination Franchise Agreement Fund to upgrade, expand, and enhance the development of the local origination channels. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact. Recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 16.
Moving Article 15.
Moved by Mr. Bateman. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Nichols. Anyone care to speak to Article 16?
This is basically nothing more than house cleaning. It's an annual. It is the operation money that functions annually for Channel 22. It's been this way for a large number of years. It's an annual, just as you will find in 16, 17, 18, 19, are basically just housekeeping items on an annual basis. And it's important, however, that it does pass, because if not, there is no funding for 22, and it'll go.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Mr. Gopalin?
Mark Gopalin, 20 Windmill Lane. I appreciate the fact that it is brought up every year, and I don't have any problems with it. However, I do see that there is no accounting of what has been, to quote the language here, agreement to upgrade, expand, and enhance the development. I think this has been a constant theme year after year on this article. And I'd like to see a listing of what has been done last year that had expended the $100,000 that we are now seeking another $100,000. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I just would like to see an accounting of it as to where that money goes and what improvement has been made. In particular, perhaps we may want to look at how this room can be more acoustically made suitable for the large audience that it is supposed to contain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalin. Articles, any further discussion on Article 16? Seeing none, Article 16 will appear on the ballot as printed. Article 17, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $90,000 from revenues generated from the police forfeiture fund, a special revenue fund created by Article 55 of the 2003 town meeting to carry out all lawful functions allowed under federal, state, and local criminal justice forfeiture programs. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact. Recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. Entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 17. Moved by Mr. Lally.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bateman. Does anyone care to speak to Article 17?
Mr. Moderator, is this working again? No? This is the second one they gave me.
Maybe it's you.
We'll go for number 3. Basically self-explanatory, Mr. Moderator. Again, you can see from 2003, this is on the same lines as the TV origination fund and the recreation fund also.
Thank you, Mr. Lally. Mr. Fallon.
Art Gopalin, 20 Windmill Lane. I think I have the same question because I'm not, I'm just a Joe Schmo. I don't really know what all lawful functions allowed under federal, state. I think it would be helpful if we list what those are to give the voters an idea as to what they are voting for. I know it doesn't have any tax impact. That doesn't mean that we cannot have some education about what is being used for and what functions, to give some examples. I think I'm looking for an answer to this as opposed to the last time on the cable. Nobody said anything about what they are going to do about it. I'd like to know what whoever that's administering it is going to do about enumerating what are the functions that had been accomplished with the similar article passed last year and what are being expected to pass this year. What are the functions that they are going to fulfill? Thank you.
Mr. Gopalin has raised a question with regard to both special revenue funds, Articles 16 and 17. Is there a place where he can find the information?
I'd like to comment on that, Bob. Hopefully you can hear me. And actually, there's 2 separate answers. As far as the cable TV expenditures, the $100,000 is a not-to-exceed number. The actual number is 1% of cable franchise fees, which I believe was roughly about $65,000 in 2009 and $58,000 in 2008. As to where the money is spent on the cable TV fund, Mr. Swotzer produces a monthly financial expenditure report, and on the funds with any level of activity, in the back of that report is an accounting for what has been spent in that fund. For any further level of detail beyond the financials, in terms of what's going to part-time help versus equipment, et cetera, I think you'd have to touch base with John Nickerson on that. I don't believe that the police forfeiture is carried in Mr. Swotzer's monthly report. Maybe he's standing up, maybe he'd like to comment on that.
If I could, Mr. Moderator?
Well, Mr. Swotzer, first question is this the type of information that Mr. Gopalin can access by going to the town office during the week?
First off, you do get a monthly summary that I do put up in regards to the cable, and just to quickly tell you that In 2009, we spent $19,500 on part-time wages. These are the people that do the cable projection work, et cetera. Social Security cost you another $1,300. Then we did buy supplies and maintenance to $48,000, and then new equipment to $30,000. If you needed further information than that, I could do an analysis and get you copies of the invoices, et cetera. But these are dollars that have been authorized by the selectmen in a public meeting when the cable commissions come along and said, we need to buy a new camera. We need to buy a new piece of electronic equipment to allow us to put the cable out onto the system in a better way. In regards to the forfeiture fund, that one is actually not kept as part of my accounting. It is off, and it is in a special holding account with the town treasurer. The monies are drawn, and they must meet all federal regulations and be reported to the feds. One of the uses that I know for exact is that they'll draw money to use for information for gambling, drugs, et cetera. They're paying informants. Okay, that's one use of the money, and that is allowed. And then they've also been able to use some of the monies for safety equipment that goes with it. But the police chief really would be the person to ask on that one. I don't keep track of it. The town treasurer keeps those amounts of money. And everything is reported to the feds annually.
Thank you, Mr. Schweitzer. Any further discussion on Article 17? Seeing none. Article 18. Shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $76,000 for the purpose of reconditioning the hockey rink on Hard Arts Way and to repair or replace existing chain link fencing and backstops at Tuck Field, and to fund such appropriation by transferring $76,000 from the Recreation Infrastructure Special Revenue Fund established under Article 44 of the 2007 Annual Town Meeting. Majority vote required, no tax rate impact, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. Entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 18.
Move forward Article 18.
Moved by Mr. Bateman, seconded by Mr. Zanoy. Ms. Martin, would you care to speak to Article 18?
Yes, please. Good afternoon. I'm Diana Martin. I'm the Recreation Parks Director here in town. And I just came up here just to give a little bit of background on this particular article and the projects that we're hoping to do with it. If this warrant article passes, this will affect both Tuck Field and Lou Brown Park, which are our two best parks here in town, our biggest parks and the most used parks. The first thing we'd like to do is resurface the inline hockey rink, which was built in 1996. So it's actually had a good life, and it's past its time when it should have been resurfaced, but it's weathered longer than we thought that it would, but it is time to resurface it. So we're hoping to repaint that surface, as well as build new fiberglass, much-needed, low-maintenance fiberglass boards for that rink. The boards that we have now are wooden, and they've shown a lot of wear over the years out in the air, and they're splintering. It did have a little facelift last year. A Day of Caring came and helped us out, but that's not a permanent fix, whereas the fiberglass boards will be a permanent fix for that. So we're hoping to do that, and as well as that, at Tuck Field, I don't know if you've been down to that park lately, but you can see that the fencing down there is really dilapidated. I don't know how old the backstops or the fencing are there. I've been here 17 years, and they're all the same that were there when I first started my job, so I don't know how much older they are, but it's time to replace a lot of that. And what we'd like to do is start with the backstops. We have 4 backstops at Tuck Field that are rusting and they're bent and just need general repair. So we're hoping to do those 4 projects also within this warrant article. And I guess the one thing I do want to say is the nice thing about this is that this is the Recreation Infrastructure warrant article. And I do want to just take a minute to correct something Mr. Rice said when he was talking about warrant article 14. This warrant article is a separate fund from the Beach Infrastructure Fund. It was a separate warrant article in 2007 from that one, so it's a completely separate fund, separate warrant article. So having said that, I'm hoping for everybody's support on this article because it does not affect the tax rate.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Mr. Gopalin.
Art Gopal, 21 Mill Lane. On this article, without commenting on the merits of it, I'm just interested in finding out what would be the fund balance after the expenditure as noted here. And second, how is the fund being accrued into this account? Is that through parks and recreation activities, or is it through a general fund, through taxation? How does that get accrued into this account?
Mr. Gopalan has asked two questions. One, what will the fund balance be after these expenditures if they are approved by the voters? And two, new money flowing into the account, if there is any, where is it coming from? Does anybody want to answer those questions for Mr. Gopalan?
Well, I believe the flow of new money is 20% of parking lot revenues, and I believe Mike is looking up the fund balance.
I believe the current fund balance at the end of this year actually is only $30,000. But if you use last year's income from the parking lots, we generated another $77,384. That's the 20% of the revenue off of the parking lot. So if you put the two together, you're going to have $117,000, and basically Diane is asking to use the 77 again. So you'd have a beginning balance of 30 plus 77 minus 77, you're going to end up about $30,000 at the end of this year.
Thank you. Any further comment, discussion on Article 18? Seeing none, Article 18 will appear on the warrant as printed. Article 19, shall the town of Hampton vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $27,850 generated from the sale of town-owned cemetery lots to the Cemetery Burial Trust Fund. The interest from this fund is withdrawn annually and deposited in the town's general fund as an offset to the amount appropriated in the operating budget for the maintenance of cemeteries. Majority vote required. No tax rate impact. Recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Recommended by the Budget Committee. Entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 19.
Move Article 19, sir.
Moved by Mr. Bateman, seconded by Mr. Lally. Is there someone who would like to speak to Article 19 on the board?
This is just a means of taking the money and depositing it to the general fund. It's an annual housekeeping event.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Mr. Lassard.
Mr. Kazaza, if I may, I'd like to ask you to do something that I see Article 38. They want to do away with the cemetery group. And I see this article we're going to vote on now. Could you bring those up together? I'll bring up 38 before this one. Where they're, I mean, it's a little bit ticklish on this one. You know? I would like to bring up, but this mic works for me.
It's now working.
I'd like to bring up Article 38 with this article, so that, why, Arthur Moody says, I didn't ask you why. So I'd like to bring it up so we can see if we're going to have a cemetery committee after the Article 38. And I'd like them brought up together. I think they would go together pretty good.
Well, let me ask the Board of Selectmen, if we have Article 19 approved, and if we have Article 38 defeated, what happens to the Article 19 money?
The money that we're talking about, it goes into the cemetery trust fund. It does not get under the control of the cemetery trustees. Okay, and what happens is that money would be in the trust fund under the trustee of the trustees of the trust funds, and those monies would come back to the town. The interest, as you know, would be to support the duties and the taking care of the cemetery. Whether or not you have a cemetery trustees is not important as long as you have cemeteries, which I think we're going to do.
Could we, Mr. Lassard, what I'm hearing from Mr. Stotzer is that they're not necessarily interlocking, and my preference has always been to take them as they come.
I agree.
So that'd be my sentiment. I'll
In other
look to the
words,
room,
you
but
you won't bend a little bit today.
I will get a sense of the meeting here as to whether you want to, but I will say that we've got to take them we got to take Article 19. I'd prefer to take them as they come, but I'll put this out to the body. Do you, and I'll phrase it this way, do you want to take Article 38 immediately after Article 19, or do you wish to retain the order in which the warrant is printed? All those in favor of shifting 38 to right after this article, raise your voter card. Down card. All opposed? Mr. Lassard has prevailed. We'll discuss Article 19 to its conclusion, and then we'll move to Article 38. Do you have anything? Wait, hold on. Do you have anything further to say on Article 19, Mr. Lassard? No, I'm fine. Okay. So, Mr. Moody, this is on Article 19 only.
Mr. Lassard is retiring as the trustee of the trust funds, since he didn't sign up yesterday. How many years? 15, 20? 30. Yay. I'd like to make a comment on no tax rate impact. Well, that's not true. Barrington started that, I think. If that money went into the general fund, it would reduce the tax rate. The state requires sale of town property going into the general fund. So how does the town of Hampton and the town of Northampton get around it? $1 they add to the price of the lot, and that $1 per lot or grave goes into the general fund. So that takes care of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 19? Hearing none, Article 19 will appear on the ballot as printed. Per the sense of the meeting, we will go now to Article 38. After we are done with Article 38, we will return to Article 20. Article 38, petition to discontinue the Board of Cemetery Trustees. As petitioned, on the petition of Martha C. Williams and at least 25 registered voters, shall the town of Hampton discontinue the Board of Cemetery Trustees by delegating their duties and responsibilities to the town manager as specified in RSA 289, majority vote required. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 38. I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Lassard, seconded by Ms. Williams. Okay. Ms. Martha, would you like to speak to Article 38?
I'm Martha Williams. Do you need my address?
Yes.
175 North Shore Road. As a volunteer at the Historical Society, I went to see if we could get the records copied so that they would be in a safe place. And I speak only for myself, not for the Historical Society. And I met with a lot of opposition, and I couldn't understand why, because it is a public cemetery, it's a town cemetery, and these are a matter of public record. And in fact, now we have finally been given permission, but when I was trying to get the information and the permission, I kept being told not to talk to the trustees, but only to the cemetery superintendent. And I don't understand this because the trustees should be setting the policies and the procedures. And I didn't find this to be the case. I kept also being told that in Exeter they didn't have to give any of this information. And I said that Exeter was a private cemetery. This is a town cemetery, and I was told, but yes, we run it like Exeter. And so the more I learned, or tried to learn, it seemed that the trustees were not, I couldn't see that there were procedures in place. I couldn't see that there was any policy. And because it is our town cemetery, I would be very happy to have the town take over the running of the cemetery. I think we are fortunate to have a good town manager who is very capable of doing this. Some towns also have public works, and we have a good public works department, and that I feel could do this job, and I think save us some money at the same time. We will always need a cemetery superintendent or director, but as far as the policies and procedures, I feel would be better off relying on the town. And it would be much easier to get information that, frankly, we only use for people who are doing genealogy, and also for checking to see where things are. We have now copied Section A. We have used it several times to get information, and now that it's on computer, that if there should ever be a fire or flood or whatever, this information is not going to be lost. And this is why I feel I would rather have our cemetery being run by our town than by cemetery trustees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 38? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Shannon O'Brien, 417 Ocean Boulevard. Am I too loud? Is that all right? Can you hear me now? I would like to say that, first of all, saying that it will not cost the taxpayers more to put it under Public Works is false. I lived in a town for 2 years where Public Works took care of the cemetery. Right now, they are still not recovered from the ice storm. And I think that in order to have the cemetery maintained the way it has been, and to also serve the public, we need to have the Board of Trustees, and we need to have this cemetery run by a personal contact. It's going to mean one thing if this is passed. It's going to mean that the taxpayers are going to pay more and they're going to receive less. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Mr. Lassard.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I thank everybody for taking these both up at the same time. The way I understand, somebody wants to put all these names in, and they want to do it. And I have my argument with the gentleman. I shouldn't say an argument. I talked to him, and I asked him if he would listen to this lady that came down. And I'm not going to get in the nitty-gritty of it, but I took that afternoon off to make sure we got down there. I do agree with the Heritage Commission that somewhere, if somebody calls and they can prove, like I had to call Lowell for mine, and I had to tell them my mother's name, where she was born, the year she was born, and the whole works to be able to get it. And then they gave me the information. And I don't want to get involved with that part of it. I think if you've got a committee, you should be able to really sit down and talk. This not sitting down talk is what's bothering me. But I was sitting with Fred not too long ago. I said, Fred, how would you like to have this cemetery run for $150,000? And I don't mind. I'd even ask him right now, can you do that, Fred? Would you like that?
I'm not looking for another piece of work.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Now, I will tell you, I've been going down the cemetery for the last 2 years because I had two people, my wife and my daughter, die in the last 2 years. But I'm going to tell you, they've done a good job. And I spoke to the cemetery boss over here, and I said, can I do my own, setting my own stone for the cemetery? Can I do some of my own grass work? All he said is, as long as you're insured, and I have the insurance. Now, another thing is, how many times I've been asked over the time, give a little hand once in a while. Well, even with Rowley Page, They got 9 cemeteries, and they do it for, if I may, could I ask, what, 150,000? 100,000?
Do we have it in here, Fred?
Yeah, it's in
Not a lot of money.
Well, I'd like to have the people know if, I think it's between 100 and, is any of the,
Now let's, Vic,
no, I don't want to get out
keep
there.
it-
All right,
keep it
okay.
at the podium.
I
Okay.
appreciate, Bobby.
Okay.
Well, 100,000, so let's say 100 to 125,000, all right? Well, when they're stuck, they're not afraid to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm stuck down here. Can you take your machine and drive down through? We've done it. Without even being asked, we've done it. We did it for Rowley Page. We did it for years and years. And that's one, I personally think that should go even at, like the cemetery. I mean, like the library, it should go right directly to the budget committee without even going through the selectmen. But that's beside the point. But we cannot afford to lose this. They do a good job. I think if they, the guy's sitting right on the end now. If you can't talk to him, you can't talk to nobody. And the same thing with the other guy up the other end. They'll talk to the people. But I don't want to see us, this is throwing money away, taking this away from them. And I hope the people here today will realize and go down there and look around and see the place and see how clean it is. And their own workers, when things get rough, they donate their time too. Their own workers down there. And I don't think that can help anywhere else. And I appreciate you for putting this together.
Thank you, Mr. Lasag.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else wishing to be heard? Jack Lasag.
Hi, this is, I wanted to talk on this because I think...
Jack, I got to get you to say your name, please, and your address.
Jack Lasad, 24 Lock Road, Hampton,
Thank
New
you.
Hampshire. I was born in this town, and I've gone through this cemetery for the last 50 years without even thinking. I go back to Ray Sturgis and all of them. We have got a crew in this cemetery that, I'll tell you, the veterans, when they were short of flowers, these fellas took it out of their own pockets. I've been there. The first plow, I had a hard time by Mr. Moody when I sold a truck to him. But these guys come in, and I shouldn't say this, but I will. They work on their own time, a lot of times free. I've been up there with my own truck, saw the limbs come down. They haul the leaves, they clean this place up for the veterans. There's a stone up there that you'll see it's for the veterans, and I go back to Rowley Page, because when we come back out of the service, some of my friends didn't come back. And I got on to Rowley, and I said, let's take up a collection and put a stone up for the veterans. Well, he was going to do it, and Rowley was a good guy, too, but we never got it. We've had problems up there on this and that, and what I'm trying to say is leave the cemetery the way it is. You got a cemetery crew that are there, they work a lot of times, and they're going to give me hell when I leave here. They don't get paid for it. They still come in and do it, and I can't see changing that place one bit. I think we're lucky to have them. We got a great town, and there's been many a times that before these fellas come, the Public Works could not plow. We were the last ones to get plowed in there because, not this man, but John, we were the last ones to get plowed, and I worked for Ray Sturgis a little bit, and we'd wait to get in there. So I say, leave it alone. Leave these fellas that run the cemetery do it. We got a great bunch that are their bosses, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lasag.
Mr. Moderator, the number on that cemetery is 104,245 actual.
104,245.
Least expensive
09
in the
actual
state.
is 104,245, which is
Thank you, Mr.
very
Lasag.
economical, I might add.
Moore.
Good afternoon. For the record, Ben Moore, Lock Road. I speak in favor of the article. It's basically a governance issue as far as I'm concerned. We have 3 trustees now who are supervising 1 full-time employee. I believe that supervision and the efforts of the cemetery superintendent can be as well directed by the town manager and the Board of Selectmen as they can by the trustees. And whether there'll be cost savings, whether it'll be a push, or whether there'll be more money, because certainly the trustees or the superintendent in his annual reports for the last 10 years has always said that there should be more money spent. It's not about money, it's about governance, and I believe that the selectmen acting through the town manager can do as well a job, if not better, than the current trustees. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bridle.
Russ Bridle, 225 Toll Farm Road. Although my address is 225 Toll Farm Road, a lot of my family lives on High Street. The cemeteries, I think we have a problem here. I think we have, there's been some sort of disconnect between the Historical Society and the cemeteries. I think they need to work on that problem. I don't think this is going to correct that problem. As we've heard from the town manager, he doesn't need another job. I think these three trustees that we have do an excellent job. Mr. Kenny, the superintendent, does a wonderful job, not only at the High Street Cemetery, or the Pine Grove Cemetery, or the Ring Swamp Cemetery, but the 7 other cemeteries that we have in this town, the little ones that people don't know about. And I think the trustees do a good job, we're well served, and I think we ought to keep it the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bridle. Mr. Shaw.
Good afternoon. I wish it was morning, but good afternoon.
Don't we all?
Matt Shaw, 11 Emery Lane, and I am one of the trustees. I can't believe I got to get up again. This will be, I think, the second or third time I've spoken to this the same article over the years. As Mrs. Williams got up and spoke, and she said some things that I'd have to disagree with. Where do I start? If I look through the newspaper articles that Mrs. Williams put in the newspaper pertaining to this, she claims that she had contacted all of the cemetery trustees and none of us would talk to her. Well, she called me on October 12th at 10:04 a.m. and I spoke with her at length about her wanting to buy programs to map the High Street Cemetery at a cost of around $4,000 to $6,000 so that the Historical Society could have information on genealogy. And I explained to her that I wasn't for that, but we would have a special meeting that she could attend and she could present her information. I noticed the other two trustees are here today, Richard Bateman and Tom Harrington, and I'll ask them in public. Have you ever spoken to or got a telephone call from Mrs. Williams?
I have not received a call from
Mr. Harrington? No, I have, and I spoke to her that day. The sad part of this is that I had to find out the information on this. One night when I turned on the selectmen's meeting at the closing hour, and Mr. Griffin brought the subject up at the meeting, that someone had asked him about the cemetery and mapping it and how it would be done in that. And evidently, Mrs. Williams got in contact with the town manager who explained to her that the cemetery is run by the cemetery trustees. Now, myself, if I was looking for somebody in the cemetery, I would probably look at the cemetery for this. So what I did was, I went on my computer and I punched in Hampton Cemetery. And the first thing that comes up on Google is the Hampton Cemetery. There's a map of where the Hampton Cemetery is and the telephone number for the Hampton Cemetery. Now, I know the superintendent, Danny Kenny, is here. Has Mrs. Williams ever called you? Never. He's never called you either, okay? From that, I understand that I plugged into my computer Hampton Cemetery trustees, and on the Hampton Cemetery trustees on the Google page came up a long article from the Hampton Library explaining all the cemeteries and the history of the cemeteries in Hampton, and it had on there the Hampton Cemetery telephone number on there. So I guess my point is, if you want to find out some information about the cemetery, you should probably, especially when, I didn't ask the town manager, but did Mrs. Williams contact you?
Yes, she did.
And
I referred it to your
Did you
board.
explain to her that?
I referred it to your board.
Right. So to this day, you know, we haven't really even been talked to about the subject, besides the night that we had the meeting and a short conversation on October 12th that I had with her. I then went on the Hampton website, and I happened to find, Town of Hampton website, and I happened to find the Hampton Handbook, which also has a whole section about the Hampton cemeteries in it, and all the telephone numbers and pertinent information about what goes on at the cemetery. So basically, this is kind of a stab in my back to come out and say the things that I've read in the paper and these things, that she's been in contact with us and we don't want to help her or anything. We voted to give them some information. We did tell them that we wanted to wait. We gave them one section. The day they came to do it, they had extra help and they thought they could do more, but we did instruct Danny to only have the Section A of the cemetery ready that day, and I can understand things didn't work out exactly the way that they were, but that's the way we voted on it that night at the meeting. You know, to do away with the cemetery trustees, when I look at the name on the list of all the cemetery trustees that have come before me and Dick and Tom, there's some of the greatest people that have run for office in this town. You've had Ashton Norton, John Stump, Sandra Nickerson, Charlotte Preston, Bryant Lacey, Dave Lang. These are all former members of this board. They're all generally have been selectmen or other people in other boards on this town. And to do away with it because someone holds a grudge, because they feel they weren't treated right when they didn't come out and ask for any help from the proper people. I can understand maybe there was a miscommunication here, but I would think when I looked for, when my father died, to look up some of his history in Lawrence, Mass., the first place I looked was in the cemetery. I went online and tried to find information in there. So I don't think the people of Hampton will fall for this. I think it's I think you all need to know we do a great job over there. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but we've kept the budget under $100,000. This is my 15th year on the board. It's been under $100,000 until this year. And the only reason we went over this year is because of the ice storm and having to spend the extra labor on it. We do everything we can to make that place as great as we can. And our job, by statute, our main responsibility is, if I can find it here, I have it right here. Our powers and duties tell us to adopt bylaws and regulations for all the cemeteries in the town, prepare an annual budget and expend the monies, expend income from all trust funds for what they're made, that they're collected for, to prepare deeds for the cemetery, and to appoint a cemetery superintendent or sexton if we do. Those are our duties. We do that. We do the best we can there. And in a closing note, I'd like to make an amendment to this article, or add an amendment to this article. I understand that it's by statute that it has to be written the way it is, but I would like to write in the amendment that passage of this article will result in an increase to the tax rate. There's no way, I'll speak to that article.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaw's amendment? Seconded by Mr. Trainer. Would you like to speak to the article, the amendment, Mr. Shaw?
There's no way. I had a conversation and I was told that if the trustees are gone, in all probability this will be turned over to the Public Works Department. And there is no possible way that the Public Works Department is going to do the job for anywhere near the money that we're doing it for over there. So I'll take for an example the Martin Luther King Day. We had a funeral that day. Mr. Kenny got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and had to plow the cemetery over there, 5 o'clock. It's a holiday. Now, who's going to plow that for the town for free? And who's going to plow it all the time for free? I mean, he's on salary, but he's not expected to work 80 hours a week on that salary. And there's other things, I believe, that will come up over time in this, that collective bargaining and things like that, unionization and other things, I believe. I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure that would all come to fruition in time on this, so that is why I make this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Anyone wishing to speak to the Shaw amendment? Simply the last line of Article 38. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion, or any discussion on the Shaw amendment?
Yes, I have a point of order under Senate Bill 2, 4013, RSA 4013. Articles prescribed by law cannot be amended at this session.
Mr. Moody has raised a question about the propriety of amending Article 38.
I think it's RSA 4013, maybe Roman numeral 5 or 6.
It's close.
Mr. Gerald, would you like to address that?
There is this is one of those articles where the warrant article to be voted says, shall we discontinue the Board of Cemetery Trustees by delegating their duties and responsibilities to the town manager? And those words do appear, although not word for word in that order. Usually what happens is the court will look at that and see if there's substantial compliance with the wording.
So I think, Mr. Shaw, the question is whether you're willing to risk the fact that this amendment might cause the article to be illegal and unenforceable, or whether you would prefer not to take that risk and leave the article as it was originally printed.
I think the only addition is that, as specified in RSA 289, it strictly says it shall not be amended at the deliberative session. And this wording is prescribed by RSA 289.
Mr. Gerald, do you have any further commentary? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moody. Mr. Shaw?
You have to explain. I didn't hear the whole.
Well, what Mr. Moody is suggesting is that by adding this language, it's impermissible, not permitted by statute, to add the amended language. So I simply ask you, I don't know whether Mr. Moody will be proved correct or not, and my question for you is, do you want to run that risk that he is correct? And if he is, it could be ruled an illegal article and given no effect? Or would you rather withdraw your amendment and not face that prospect? I make myself clear?
Yes, but I don't know how I want to do it. I would say leave it in there.
We're going to have a vote. We're going to have a vote on the amendment as to whether the language stays or not. Mr. Moore.
Ben Moore, Lock Road. Obviously, as a opponent of the article, Mr. Shaw's amendment would mean that either way he might suffice with his position. There has been no science put in front of me that says this is going to increase the tax rate. I could just as easily have come up 10 minutes ago and said that they pay $3,000 for a bookkeeper, so I can automatically guarantee a $3,000 decrease by passing this because the finance department can do it. So this amendment, I don't believe is based upon any science that I have seen. If we're questioning that it's not in accordance with the RSAs regarding the legality of the article, then it would seem that the mere mention of an amendment confirms Mr. Shaw's position that he's opposed to it. So I would vote against, and I would recommend that you vote against this amendment.
One thing I'd like to add as your moderator, I have a strong preference for as few words in an article as possible. And we have played a game, and I'm going to suggest that it started with the town, where we've got these parentheses that say no tax impact. And I think when you start adding language to articles, one person's quote-unquote information is another person's advocacy. So you've watched the ball bounce back and forth today because while the town may think that's neutral information, the body has felt otherwise. And I think it pertains to Mr. Shaw's amendment, where I know, you know what he's trying to do. He feels it's an absolute certitude that this is going to cost more money if you go in this direction. And I would believe that he feels that's going to aid his cause in the ballot booth. But, as Mr. Moore said, we don't have a study on it. So if it was up to me, we wouldn't have no tax impact, we wouldn't have that it's already in the tax rate. We would stay away from the issue entirely. Because really, in my opinion, what's going on is people are trying to get in that ballot booth with you. In their last shot, when you read the last couple of words, they hope to persuade you one way or the other. I would like to think that all of us study these articles ahead of time and can gather on our own whether they will have an impact or not. But that's my digression for the day. We're on Mr. Shaw's amendment, and
I will withdraw my amendment, but I have a point of order that I'd like to ask.
let me get the second. Is there a second who will withdraw the, who seconded your, Mr. Trainer? Would you withdraw your second, Mr. Trainer? Okay, so the Shaw amendment has been withdrawn, and Mr. Shaw has the floor. If you could move to the microphone, please.
If I could, someone has handed me this. It's a decision, a court decision called, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with it, but it's Barrington versus Grant.
Yeah.
And it confirmed that nothing prevents the voters at a deliberative session from effectively removing any subject from consideration at the town election by amending an article to delete the entire subject thereof.
That's true. The Supreme Court ruled a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, that if you took an article, you could propose an amendment to simply have the article read 2C, T-O-S-E-E, and nothing more. And while some might say that changes the subject matter, et cetera, the New Hampshire Supreme Court said that was a permissible amendment.
Okay. I would make a motion to do that.
All right. Is there a second? Mr. Trainer has seconded. So, Mr. Shaw, the effect of Mr. Shaw's amendment to strike all the language in Article 38 except for the words 2C is to gut the language. It's been moved by Mr. Shaw, seconded by Mr. Trainer. Any discussion on the Shaw amendment?
That's an amendment. You can't make an amendment. See it on the screen.
We've got, the first amendment was withdrawn, so we're back to the full article, and then Mr. Shaw made this subsequent amendment. Mr. Kenny? So we're speaking to the Shaw amendment, which is proposing to have Article 38 simply read 2C.
I would ask, well, first of all, I would ask the town manager, is, in your opinion, would the intent of this article to turn maintenance of the cemetery over the town be an increase, cost more money than what is being paid now? Your opinion?
Mr. Moderator, the answer to that question is yes. If it was turned over to the town, there would be an increase in expenses. I'll answer on the basis of the prior observation, for instance, on Martin Luther King Day. If we had town personnel there, we'd be paying them double time and a half to be present, because the union contract requires that.
Thank you. My motion would be to change.
We got Mr. Shaw's motion and Mr. Shaw's motion alone. Until we dispose of the motion, we can't take a further, excuse me, his amendment, we can't take
Okay,
a
I will
further.
second it to do that, and then I would like to make another amendment.
No, we've got people lined up from here to the beach to talk about the Shaw amendment. So if you're all set, I'm going to move to Mr. Pierce.
Yes, I'm Mike Pierce, 16 Hebden Avenue. And is that too loud, or am I too loud? Whatever. Let me know if you can't hear me. It came to my attention over a period of time ago that there's absolutely no RSA or accountability to the townspeople in relation to the cemetery trustees. We have accountability as far as ordinances and so forth for the town. Like, for example, if something has to go out for a bid, there's a pretty good firm guidelines for such activities. With the cemetery trustees, there is no such guidelines, and the RSA supports that. They are an independent legal body. Well, that's okay all by itself. However, if you have a question about some of the activities that go on there, some of the financial transactions, etc., there's not much anybody in Hampton can do about it, say, well, that's the way they do business over there. And I wasn't too happy about that. But putting that aside, I sympathize also with Mrs. Williams because I was there the night that it was implied, and I think the news reporter was there and several other people were there, that there'd be full cooperation on this issue. And as a taxpayer who likes to watch the money, okay, getting all those cemetery records done by the group who's willing to do it for nothing, how can you beat the price? You cannot beat the price. So now the only question then is, why are they not cooperating with a free operation? I know that several have got up and said how people always volunteer to help the cemetery and all that sort of thing. I have no problem with that whatsoever, but here we are, we're just trying to computerize the records, and they run into a blank wall. And there's no accountability for that whatsoever. So I'm in favor of keeping the article as it was in the beginning before any changes whatsoever, because I think it should be up to the voters to decide, because there is no accountability, no apparent cooperation, that we have some problems here. How do we address that? And I think that's very important to the taxpayers of Hampton when it's their property in the cemetery and so on and so forth, their trust funds. It belongs to us. It does not belong to the trustees. It belongs to all of us. And I want to make sure that's clear. And when I pursued that issue, I ran into a brick wall also, just like Mrs. Williams is referring to. So I think from that point of view only, you can't say she has a grudge. She might have a grudge, but there's more than that problem. There's several problems. And that's the tip of the iceberg, her complaint. My complaint, I think, is very serious, okay? And I'll let you decide for yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Ms. Woolsey. No, Mr. Kenny, there are other people that are in line before you. No. No, sir. The protocol we have is, unless these people yield to you, they're in line to speak to the Shaw Amendment.
I want to address the amendment with all due respect to the Supreme Court. I am concerned about setting a precedent, and I am opposed to this amendment because I feel strongly that in this town, in this country, in this democracy, that those of us who petition privately to the legislative body of this town, those of us who petition privately to the voters, should not be at the mercy of trickery. And I consider this a form of trickery, whether the court would agree with that or not. I think it's only fair to petitioners, and I don't care whether I agree with them or not. I think it's only fair to petitioners to allow their article to appear on the warrant and let the taxpayers say yes or no. I think this is a very bad precedent to set for this town.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey. Mr. Moore. And we're going to wrap this amendment up. So if Mr. Kenny wants to be part of that line, but
as much as I sometimes hate to admit it, Ms. Mary Louise Woolsey has said about exactly what I was going to. This is a violation of democracy, and I'm sure it's not as intended by the supporters of SB 2 in this town. So, thank you.
Mr. Rice.
Fred Rice, 15 Heather Lane. I think that every citizen of the town of Hampton, if they want to bring something up for a vote of the town, we don't have the type of deal that they do in California, a referendum. But when somebody goes out and gets signatures, people that agree with them, they meet the requirement, they have the right for that issue to be heard and seen by the public and voted on by the public. For somebody to try and do an end run around here and gut an article just because they don't like it, so that their special interest can, and I don't care what the issue is. I am really ticked off about an attempt to subvert somebody's wishes to try and get their voice heard and have people vote on it. And I think everybody in this room ought to be mad about the attempt to deny people the vote. We had a selectman in this town and a guy that everybody knew, Tom Gillick. Let the voters vote. He said that all the time. Let the manager manage, let the voters vote. And those were his bywords, and we ought to be paying attention to that now and not try to take away the right of the public to have the opportunity to vote on an issue such as this. Thank you.
Mr. Rice, no, I've told these people they're going to have an opportunity. I don't know who's first here. Ms. Sanfie, and you've got the mood of the room, Ms. Sanfie. It's quick to the point, please.
Okay, thank you. I am opposed to this amendment for the same reasons that were spoken before, even though I am opposed to the article as well, but I do believe in democracy and giving the people the fair chance to make a vote on their own decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanfie. Ma'am?
The voters also have a right to know.
Please, you're right. Hands off those microphones, please. We got enough problems.
I'm not going to throw it or anything.
No. It's just that we've got enough. Go ahead.
The voters of Hampton also have a right to know if this is going to cost them more money. And I think that that question is being avoided here. Town manager even stated that if it's done on a holiday, it was going to be double time. This amendment is going to cost the taxpayers more money to receive less services.
Thank you. Mr. Gopalan, and then we're going to take the amendment up for a vote.
Thank you, moderator. I think Mr. Rice, Ms. Woolsey spoke about this, and I'm also of the same opinion that this is a petition that is collected, drawn out by an individual with collection of 25 other people, and it needs to have full hearing with the voters and not to be amended and otherwise distorted so that we don't end up with something that the voters cannot vote on, thereby usurping the rights of the people to petition their government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. All right, all those in favor of the Shaw Amendment, which is this is the Shaw Amendment, just the Shaw Amendment, so that the article will read, in effect, 2C. All in favor of amending the article down to the words 2C, raise your voter card. Down cards. All opposed? Down cards. I declare that the Shaw Amendment has been defeated. So we are back where we began with the article as printed. Do we need any further discussion?
I would like to.
All right, Mr. Since you started this party early on 38, Vic, we'll let you end.
I maybe started the party, but I disagree. I'm a little bit upset to say I came up here in trickery, because I've never done that in my life, and I've been in this town many years.
No, Mr. Lassard.
I didn't do it.
Mr. Lassard,
So
no, I don't believe that comment, excuse me, sir, I don't believe that comment was directed at you, so.
Well, he
you
said
can rest
that.
assured.
I moved the motion away. I moved it away.
So we all set on discussing Article 38. All in favor? No, all in favor of moving to the next article, raise your voter card. Down. Any opposed? All right, so Article 38 is going on the ballot as it is printed, and we're back to Article 20. You can see why I don't like going out of order. Article 20. Article 20. Shall the town of Hampton vote to rescind the direction as given to the Board of Selectmen by Article 44 of the 2009 town meeting, not to renew the agreement between the town of Hampton and the town of Rye, New Hampshire regarding treatment and disposal of wastewater upon the expiration of its first renewal period on November 17, 2014, and instead vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to renew said agreement for an additional 5-year period after November 17, 2014 on the same terms. Majority vote required. Note, the initial 20-year agreement, which was entered into in 1989, has enabled the town of Rye to dispose of its wastewater at Hampton's wastewater treatment plant in return for Rye's initial investment of approximately $5 million to establish a Hampton-Rye sewer connection and Rye's continuing payment to Hampton of a proportionate share based on gallons of both the use of Hampton's facility and B, Hampton's capital costs. For the year 2009, these payments from Rye to Hampton totaled $87,531. Due to the sewer work completed in the course of the Hampton Beach Infrastructure Improvements Project, Hampton's wastewater treatment plant has more than enough capacity to handle the wastewater coming from Rye. By its terms, this agreement is automatically renewable for successive periods of not less than 5 years, unless 2 years prior to the termination date, either party notifies the other that the agreement shall not be renewed. I will entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 20. Moved by Mr. Zanoy. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Nichols. Mr. Zanoy, do you wish to speak to the article?
Yeah, yes, I do. Again, this is my first...
Mr. Moderator, I tried to get in this point of information before between articles. Could you tell me if the 6 zoning articles have been restricted reconsideration?
I don't...
Have the 6 zoning articles been restricted in reconsideration?
I don't believe they have, Mr. Moody, but they are not articles whose language can be altered.
Well, neither was that last one.
Well, I'm going to make a ruling on those that no reconsideration is necessary. We've moved on beyond them. They're not subject, as I announced at the outset of the meeting, and I'm going to go to Mr. Zanoy. Mr. Zanoy, please speak to Mr. Moody. Please let Mr. Zanoy have the floor.
Yes, this is my first year on the board, and you know, I got to know the facts a little bit here in terms of this particular article. We're bringing in revenue this year to the tune of $87,531, revenue that helps our tax rate. We need revenue, all the revenue we can get. We have plenty of capacity at the transfer station and the sewer plant. I've asked John Price that early on. It's not a capacity issue. We're bringing in revenue. We're providing service to our neighbor in Rye. We're getting serviced on the west side of town of Hampton. We have some houses being serviced by Exeter with respect to the sewer. Last year, there were 2 articles that appeared on the town ballot. I thought they were very confusing. People were asking about them right up to the day of voting. They were not exactly as clear as they should have been. I think that led to confusion and you know, because of the ambiguity. So, I mean, we're getting revenue. We have plenty of capacity. It's a service to our neighbor from a regionalization point of view. We're being helped by Exeter on the west side of town. I think this is a win-win situation, and I'm absolutely for this article.
Thank you, Mr. Zanoy. Anyone else wishing to speak on Article 20? Yes. Ms. Woolsey.
I'm going to get Mr. Moody a little excited this morning or afternoon, whatever time we're in, because his letter to the editor in the Hampton Union mentioned that it would be the 3rd time that the sewer plan for Rye has been turned down. In fact, it's the 4th time because the public in this community voted to rescind the authority of the Board of Selectmen in October of 1989 because they were so infuriated with the vote of that Board of Selectmen. And I sat on that board, and I was the one vote in opposition. And I still oppose this.
Excuse me, could we have quiet in the back of the room, please, and respect to the Speaker of the podium?
I still oppose this article. It's interesting that we're not particularly interested, obviously, in obtaining revenue from emergency medical service by running a second ambulance, but we're thinking we're going to get really a nice pile of money from this. We are serving a community to the north of us that doesn't want to provide sewer service to its residents and doesn't want to expand its sewer service because it wants to keep its zoning intact. Northampton and Rye for years dumped raw sewage into the Atlantic Ocean, ladies and gentlemen. The problem with what happened in 1989 was that there was tremendous pressure on that Board of Selectmen from the state to go ahead and allow Rye to hook in. Don't forget, this line goes through Northampton, and at some point in time, theoretically, they could be allowed to hook in as well. We have a secondary wastewater treatment plant, which at some point, probably in the not too distant future, is going to have to be converted to a tertiary treatment plant. That means you're going to be able to drink the water that comes out of the end of it, if you're very brave. That's going to cost a fortune. That's going to cost a lot of money. I'm not of a mind to add any more waste to our system than we have to. The public has spoken decisively on this already. I support defeating this article. I have never been in favor of allowing Rye to come into our wastewater treatment system, and I continue to be absolutely opposed. And I ask you to think very carefully on this before you vote.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey. Mr. Rice.
Well, we're back to the point where Mrs. Woolsey and I disagree on a point. Yes. I agree with every single thing that Mr. Zanoy said. This thing was put together last year. I think it was ill-advised to have the articles put together last year. We need to put this back in. We're not losing capacity. We're gaining revenue. We're helping a sister town. After this thing went through last year, I spoke to Bud Jordan, the Public Works Director up in Rye. I was serving with him on the board of the Southeast Regional Refuse District at the time. And I asked him if he had heard about this. Hadn't heard a thing about it. So this was done in the closed room of our town right here, and nobody in Rye knew anything about it. Now afterwards, I'm sure they did, and they came and spoke to everybody in town. My question on the only question I have on this one is, how did last year's article ever, and why did last year's article ever get put together to begin with to get out of this? It took somebody that had the legal knowledge and had the detailed knowledge of RSAs to try and put this together. And I believe it was our town attorney that put this together, the two articles, or the attorney and the manager. It wasn't a petitioned article, and I don't believe that anybody on the board themselves initiated that. And I think this is one of the, so we spent legal money to put that one forward last year. Now we're spending money again to draft another article. And I saw a thing in the paper the other day and heard on one of the board meetings that it was the public's fault because they didn't understand it. Well, if this thing was put together properly last year and properly educated and publicized, the public would have known what it was and whether it was good about it and what was bad about it. But, oh, you passed it over. Well, you shouldn't have done that. We put the article forward, but you shouldn't have voted for our article. That's what they're saying. Right now, there is no reason not to assist another town. It's already been paid for. We have more than enough capacity, more than enough capacity. The beach infrastructure project raised the capacity of that plant by quite a bit. And it's going to be a long time before the EPA comes down and makes us do a tertiary plant. That's going to be a total remake of something anyway that we couldn't possibly comply with without major bonding and everything else. So this is a sound article. It's doing what we should, it's correcting what we shouldn't have done last year. So I urge you to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Page.
Nathan Page, Drakeside, Roehampton. I have a question. In the second paragraph of the article, it says that it sounds like the town of Rye paid Hampton $5 million to buy into the sewer system. Wasn't that's the cost that they paid to put their lines in the ground?
That was their cost.
That was their. So I don't know why that's relevant to us as Hampton citizens. As it almost sounds, people were thinking that they bought in $5 million into our plant. The second question is that we received the $87,531 from the town of Rye. That's the cost to operate the plant, isn't it, for the sewer?
This is the money they've given us.
I'm sorry?
This is the money they have given us. This is revenue.
What does it cost to process the sewer from the town of Rye? That's it. How much is it? How much is the $87,000 profit?
Feeling, and it's the finance director's feeling. The majority of that $87,000 flows to the bottom line.
Goes to the bottom line.
So it's
The majority of it, not all of it.
Do we
The
know what it
incremental
costs
are
to
limited.
process the sewer from Rye?
What is that?
Do we know what it costs to process the sewer from Rye? Is it broken out per gallons or however the Public Works?
There has not been a detailed financial analysis. However, the finance director and I share the opinion that the majority of the revenues go to the bottom line.
So we don't know if we're giving Rye a fair deal or we're getting taken or we're sticking it to them.
I believe they're being charged based on a percentage of flow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Page. Mr. Moody. Before I recognize Mr. Moody, is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Go ahead, Mr. Moody.
I haven't spoken on this one yet.
I know, not on this one. But I like to spread it around.
That $5 million that Rye apparently cost, which they got a huge grant from the state, federal government through the state, they were under court order, put a sewer in, and they designed a sewer, small sewer system, plant. But they had friends on the Hampton Board of Selectmen for one reason or another. A year and a half after the selectmen did that, a year and a half before, the selectmen had put an article in the town meeting, the regular floor session of town meeting, the old system, saying that Rye would pay 75% of our cost of the northeast interceptor if we would let Rye come in. It was overwhelmingly turned down on the floor of town meeting. And that cost us $5 million plus interest for the Northeast Interceptor that allowed them to come in. Went from the Northampton line on Ocean Boulevard to High Street, down High Street, across country to Winnicott Road, and across Winnicott Road to the plant. As far as whether we have been charging all these years enough to Rye, I don't believe we have been. I saw enough sewer bills from engineer consulting firms, G. Underwood, who had the design of all our sewer projects, the bidding process contract, and the supervision of the construction. And every one of those bills had all the supervisors charged on every one of those bills, and there were partial bills into each project a little ways. The principals of the firm had a fee, but I never saw a bill that had all the supervisors, including the town manager, being charged to Rye for this service every month. So I think we've been undercharging them, as we do whenever you get involved with other towns. Our sister town, 2 towns away, I don't think so. As soon as they got that contract, they put in a sewer, overlay zoning district in the beach, because as their testimony at their public hearings in Rye, they didn't want to become another Hampton Beach. And they've continued that type of talk in their public hearings on most all of their zoning amendments, zoning variances are Rye Beach, or one of the beaches in Rye. So I don't think we've been paying much. Always the bigger town always gets taken when you're dealing with smaller towns. 53B, solid waste district, the same way. And I would be in favor, as I was last year. This article, rewritten apparently, passed, got defeated. About over 2 to 1 in the vote. The article, companion article to give them 5 more years because we missed the deadline, passed very easily too. But I'm trying to read last year's warrant, but I don't have time.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Mr. Gerald, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, just in response to Mr. Rice's comment. When the articles last year were written, the selectmen had a policy in mind. They wanted the voters to, first of all, there was two issues. One, how long should the first renewal period be? And that was Article 43, and it was decided by the townspeople that it's 5 years. That's where we have till the time period of 2014. The second issue was whether or not after that time there would be a renewal. The selectmen back then wanted to give the townspeople the chance to vote on that, and the responsibility of the town manager and myself, between us when articles are written, is to effectuate the policy of the selectmen at the time. This year, the selectmen have had different thought about this, and again, our job is to put the policy into effect and let the voters vote.
Thank you, Mr. Gerald. Seeing no one else at the podium, Article 20 will appear on the warrant as it is printed. Article 21, I'll entertain a motion to waive the reading of Article 20. You may. Is there a second? All those in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 38? Raise cards, down cards. All opposed? Article 38 is restricted. Mr. Guthrie. I'll entertain a motion to waive the reading of Article 21 in its entirety due to its length.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bateman, seconded by Mr. Griffin. Is there a motion to open discussion on Article 21?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Bateman, seconded by Mr. Lally. Mr. Bateman, would you like to speak to Article 21?
This is basically an administrative piece. It functions with clarity. It gives us a alternative that does not presently exist, and it actually puts a little bit of bite in the dog rather than constantly visiting similar places or several times at one place because they keep doing the wrong thing, but we don't have a means of truly punishing them. This will give us a means of controlling some behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 21? Mr. Guthrie.
The part I'd like to talk about here is Section 7 appeals. With all due respect to Fred up there, I think he's probably been one of the best town managers we've had. But this here is more like a police state. I mean, everything the town says goes, and if you're doing something wrong and they fine you, you get to go to the town manager. I only have one word to say about that, and I hope everybody remembers when they vote. Barrington. Okay? If you didn't like it, he'd tell you, well, if you don't like it here, move. Okay, if we ever get a town manager like that again, that same thing could happen. I'm sure Fred would be a lot more just on his decisions, but to give all that power to the town, first to fine you, to penalize you, and then if you want an appeal, you have to go back to that same town, that's ludicrous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 21? Seeing none, Article 21 will appear on the warrant as printed. Article 22. Shall the town of Hampton vote to accept the provisions of RSA 72:29-A Roman 2, granting to the surviving spouse of any person who was killed or died while on active duty in the armed forces of the United States or any armed forces of any governments associated with the United States in the wars, conflicts, or armed conflicts or combat zones set forth in RSA 72:28 shall receive a tax credit in the amount of $1,400 from the taxes due upon the surviving spouse's real and personal property, whether residential or not, in the town of Hampton where the surviving spouse is a resident, said exemption to be effective on and after April 1, 2010. Majority vote required, recommended by the Board of Selectmen, recommended by the Budget Committee. The purpose of this article is to update the terms of the exemption as it is being administered in Hampton to conform to several amendments that have been made to RSA 72:29-A A by the New Hampshire General Court Legislature, including the legislature's elimination of the disqualification for the surviving spouse upon remarriage. Fiscal impact note. Finance Department, the estimated 2010 tax rate impact is .001 per $1,000, 1/10 of 1 cent per $1,000 valuation. I'll take a motion to open discussion on Article 22. Moved by Mr. Griffin, seconded by Mr. Bateman. Would the board care to speak to the article?
I just wanted to say that this is something that's already been being done. This is another one of those things where we're trying to clean up the language a little bit, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Ms. Kaiser?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ann Kaiser, 7 Palmer Street. I just have a question on this wording on this article. It refers to personal property tax, so that also means the automobile registration to the town of Hampton? Jane, do you know? Because personal property is considered the automobile tax.
So the question is whether the abatement would apply to the automobile portion.
Mr. Manager?
Good question. Yeah. Mr. Moderator, this is verbatim from the statute. I've worked in 7 towns in New Hampshire. I've yet to see anybody receive an abatement on their motor vehicle tax. What happens here usually is someone comes in and applies for this credit to be applied to their real estate property tax, and that's where it ends up. I think we'd be fraught with problems to try to take this off a motor vehicle tax because that's a state tax, not a local tax.
Thank you, Mr. Welch.
If that's the case, is this the wording that has to be there by statute, or can we remove that personal property?
This is in the statute.
It's not in quoted language, however, so I think it could be taken out for clarity's sake. That's a very good question.
I understand the workings of all of that. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone further wish to be heard on Article 22? Seeing none, Article 22 will appear.
Mr. Moderator?
Yep.
I move to restrict reconsideration 18 through 20. I don't believe you need to do it to 22. I would see no interference at that point.
18 through 20?
21.
21, excuse me. Motion by Mr. Bateman to restrict reconsideration of Articles 18 through 21. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Griffin. All in favor, raise your voter card. Down card. Any opposed? Articles 18 through 21 have been restricted. Article 23. Shall the town of Hampton vote to clarify the terms of the ambulance service revolving fund established by Article 19 of the 2006 town meeting pursuant to RSA 31:95H 1 small b by providing that such part of the money received from fees and charges for ambulance and attendant emergency medical services deemed by the Board of Selectmen to be in excess of EMS fund capital and expense needs be treated as general revenue by the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of reducing the tax rate. Majority vote required. In accordance with RSA 31:95H1B, funds then allocated to and deposited into the EMS fund to provide and improve emergency medical services as well as for ambulance replacement as needed will be allowed to accumulate from year to year and shall not be considered as part of the town's general fund unreserved fund balance. Defeat of this article will leave in place the ambulance service revolving fund as established by Article 19 of the 2006 town meeting. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 22, moved by Mr. Zanoy, seconded by Mr. Nichols. Mr. Zanoy, do you wish to speak to Article 23?
Yes, I do, Mr. Moderator. This really came to my attention when we were budgeting in September-ish for all the various departments. We came upon the Emergency Medical Services Fund, and I saw over 500,000 in there, 530 or 540-ish. And I started to ask some questions, and I didn't feel comfortable that we would pile up money like that without benefit of really the taxpayer. As it stands, even right today, the end of December, it's $441,497. And even if you take out the 170, I guess we haven't spent that yet for the new ambulance we ordered, it would be $271,497. And I inquired about it, and I may have used the wrong terminology while on Channel 22, but I thought we could just, move it over to the general fund and operating budget, but we can't do that. Not by the way the statute is written. So we looked at the statute that's referenced here, 31:95 in total. And in that budget, it does allow the selectmen to regulate the money. In other words, the money comes into the town. And in that article, it did state, and it's a lengthy article, it was buried in that article, but it does say that the selectmen have the right to regulate the money into the EMS fund. But once it's in the fund, and that's where it stays. So we discussed this, and in the Budget Committee as well. And what came up in the Budget Committee was, that they felt they were misled because the original article as written didn't clarify that, wasn't clear about that fact, and that we were grabbing the money when we shouldn't be grabbing the money. We had no right to grab the money. So in order to clarify that misconception, we rewrote Article 23 that is very clear, which is allowed anyway by the RSA, but wasn't stipulated when the first article went through, clearly. That allows us, the money comes into the town, and we then decide what to put into the EMS fund and what can stay in the operating budget, further help the taxpayer in general. And that's what this article is all about. It's clarity. It allows the selectmen to govern. We're elected to govern. So, what we're trying to do is help our revenue streams as much as we can. At the same time, we're not going to put any fund like the EMS fund in jeopardy. You can count on that. It'll get all of its services and materials that it needs. But this is what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Zanoy. Anyone wishing to speak on this article? Ms. Woolsey?
Yes. I am opposed to this article, and I want to tell you why. Under former manager Barrington, he initiated a series of special revenue funds, which were a pain in the neck and caused a problem for police and fire, particularly because they had to be on the warrant every year. The public had to vote for them every single year. That caused quite a mess for the police private detail fund for a couple of years. Once the state legislature set up the concept of revolving funds, the Budget Committee suggested to the selectmen, and it's probably the only suggestion of ours they ever took, that we set up revolving funds for police and fire, and there's a separate type of revolving fund for recreation. So in 2006, Article 19 on the town warrant, which was drafted by Attorney Gerald in behalf of his board, read as follows. Shall the town of Hampton rescind the provisions of RSA 31:95C as to the Hampton Emergency Medical Services Fund, a special revenue fund created by Article 15 of the 2000 town meeting and funded with revenues generated from ambulance and emergency medical services calls, and transfer any surplus remaining in said fund up to the sum of $200,000 into, and vote to establish an ambulance service revolving fund pursuant to RSA 31:95H Roman I-B. The money received from fees and charges for ambulance and attendant emergency medical services shall be allowed to accumulate from year to year and shall not be considered part of the town's general fund unreserved fund balance. The town treasurer shall have custody of all monies in the fund and shall pay out the same only upon order of the town manager. No further town meeting approval required. These funds may be expended only to provide, improve, and/or enhance ambulance and emergency medical services. Adoption of this article will have no effect on this town's tax rate. Pursuant to RSA 31:95D Roman II, the effective date of this article, if passed by the town, shall be retroactive to January 1, 2006. And that article was recommended by the Board of Selectmen and the Budget Committee. What didn't show in that article is that under 3195H Roman 2, if a town establishes a revolving fund for any of the purposes listed in paragraph 1, and that includes providing ambulance services, it may deposit into the fund all or any part of the revenues from fees, charges, or other income derived from the activities or services supported by the fund, and any other revenues approved by the legislative body for deposit into the fund. Once in the fund, the money can accumulate, etc. This is another problem, and we referenced this briefly earlier in this meeting. We as a budget committee and we as voters have to rely on the wording of the articles presented to us at public hearings, at the deliberative session, and on the warrant. The impression that the public took away from the revolving fund Article 19 for the year 2006 was that the revenues shall be allowed to accumulate in the Emergency Medical Services Fund. There was no reference, although the statute clearly references, and it's a reasonably short statute, the statute clearly references the ability of the selectmen to apparently intercept money before it gets to the fund, but once it's in the fund, it can't be expended, nor can it be tapped for any other purpose. You have a couple of considerations here. First of all, the failure of the Board of Selectmen to adequately warn the voters of the complete purpose of that fund. The other component is that if you are telling the voters that you have too big a surplus in that fund, shouldn't you be taking a look at how you're spending it? Shouldn't you be taking a look at whether you are taking every opportunity, since this fund literally has no tax impact on the voters? This fund is raised from fees for services. This is a user fee endeavor. Should the selectmen not be taking every opportunity to see to it that any and all fire department expenses that are incurred in the providing of the emergency service component as opposed to the fire service component should be charged off to this account? And ambulances, by the way, and the oldest one is now a 2002, should be regularly replaced at 2-year intervals so that we always have in service new, up-to-date equipment. There's nothing more important for you and for me if we have to call on the services of this department to have the up-to-date medical and emergency service provided. So I am absolutely opposed to going back to the well another time to try to say to the public what they perhaps should have said the first time, but the intent of the public as voted with the wording of that article has been crystal clear. To attempt to change it now, I think, is folly. And how many times are we going to go back and try to change things? And this is a Board of Selectmen article. This is not a private petition article. How many times are we going to try to hoodwink the public? We were told the specific provisions. I don't believe any voters go running regularly for the statute books. I object to putting articles on the warrant that do not define clearly the full and specific purpose and meaning of the article. And the voters in 2006, including myself, read that article, understood the intent, voted for that specific function, and I would say to you that I am absolutely opposed to this article by the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey. Mr. Warburton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I echo what Chairman Woolsey just got finished saying, and once again, we're giving what I consider extra undue power of moving money around to this Board of Selectmen, and as we all know, selectmen come and selectmen go. This article, everybody knew what the intent was when it was established many, many years ago, strictly for EMS services and the revenue coming from ambulances and other things staying in that fund. The other thing that the voters should be very careful of, and very nervous, quite frankly, looking at this article, there is nowhere in here where it states how much money the selectmen can take away and not put in this fund. They don't have to put anything in here. They can't touch what's in there now. They don't have to put any more. This is absolutely incredible, and I have to tell you, and you guys have sat up there all day and said nothing, so I'm not sure whether you're agreeing with us or you just don't want to say anything. But for somebody who sat on this board for 9 years, we are playing a cash game with you guys, and these articles are ludicrous. I think Mr. DeMarco is going to come up in a second and do a major amendment on this, but you're taking away what the voters approved many years ago and has worked quite fine. Stop misleading us.
Mr. Warburton. Mr. DeMarco.
Victor Marco, I live in Milburn Avenue. I stand opposed to the article also as it's written. I just listened to an explanation that blows my mind, that this is a revenue-producing thing to reduce taxes. It's not a revenue-reducing article to reduce taxes. It was a revenue-producing, non-tax effect raised by our ambulances. And this takes me back to what we talked about earlier. I almost think that they have a problem with people who get sick. We want to cut back ambulances. We don't want to retrieve revenue from the ambulance service, dedicated to the ambulance service, and now we want to be able to, whatever revenue we do take it out of there and put it somewhere else, wherever they feel like putting it. I just don't understand it. I can't follow the explanations. I can't follow the explanation where this is a benefit to the town. I'd like to propose the following. As we talked earlier, when you make a motion like this on a warrant petition article by an individual, it should be gone to the voters. This is a selectman's article. So I would propose to move to strike all of Article number 23 except the words, "The town of Hampton shall vote." I have it written here.
Second.
Moved by Mr. DeMarco, seconded by Mr. Buck, to amend Article 23 so it is limited in its language to "the town of Hampton shall vote."
Second.
Is there any discussion on the DeMarco amendment?
I'd like to say a few more words there.
Mr. Zanoy.
Well, go ahead, Fred.
Fred Rice, 15 Heather Lane. I'll speak to the amendment.
Mr. Rice, yield, please. Mr. Zanoy, go ahead.
Yeah, my comments on what I've heard here over the last few minutes is, you know, we sit on the Board of Selectmen, and I'd like to think we have the ability to manage. I really do. And when you see money piling up in one area, relatively unused, you'd like to think there's a better use for that. And you'd like to think that we could regulate that. If it comes into the town, we'd have enough sense to put enough money into the EMS fund to take care of its needs. And the rest of the money could be used elsewhere based on our needs for the town. That's our motivation. That's all. To manage, like businessmen. That's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Zanoy. Mr. Rice.
I think that this amendment is good. I think we should scrap this article. It's ill-conceived to begin with. What it does, in effect, is it allows, think about the people who use the ambulance. They're the ones who are sick, they're old, so forth, and they are paying for the ambulance. Now, they're paying the town, whatever, and it's supposed to be like a nonprofit organization. There's not supposed to be a surplus. If there is a surplus, it continues to accrue until you can use it. So when it is used, it needs to be used one of two ways. Either buy ambulances a little more often if you have the money to do it, or stop charging so damn much for the services to begin with. Now, I know that part of this is compensated by insurance, et cetera, et cetera. For any portion that is not, it shouldn't be. Because what you're doing, in effect, if you're allowing the money to accrue and then taking it off and putting it in the general fund, you're saddling the people who are sick and use medical services in this town with contributing an extra share of taxes into the general fund. The problem is there is nothing in this thing that says what limit you have to hit. I heard Mr. Nichols say at the December 10th Budget Committee hearing that there was $175,000 in there that was supposed to be a limit for a new ambulance. I never heard that. We adopted this thing, this particular fund and created it while I was on the board, and that was never, ever, ever the intent. It was to take a user fee and run this thing outside. They paid money in, you used it to run the thing itself. You never were supposed to take extra and use it as an extra source of cash or income to supplement the tax base. What this leaves the door open to, if you pass this, if you pass the warrant article, is that you give the selectmen an ability to suck money out of funds whenever and how much and for whatever amount they want to put it into the general fund without any requirement on where they have to spend it or not. The other part is that there is no provision up front as to whether they need it or not. So I think this is a very ill-conceived article. To consider an article like this that is a payment made by injured people in the town for emergency services, to say that we're considering managing that as a source of revenue, that's like a speed trap. That's like a police speed trap. I was just talking with the Chief Sullivan out here at one of the breaks here, and he said that he never wants to get accused of running a speed trap. He does things because it's the right thing to do, and that's what the deal is on this. Running the EMS fund is fine, but don't use it as a source of revenue. Then you get into the speed trap mentality. So one of two things should happen. I think this should be, I support this amendment right here to scrap this wording. And if they want to do it, they need to do one of two things. Spend the money more often so that we have newer and better and more equipment all the time, or use it to hire more people, or start charging less, one or the other. But I don't think this should ever be considered as a source of revenue for the tax base. Thank you.
Mr. Rice. Ms. Latimer, on the amendment, on the DeMarco amendment, which is the town of Hampton shall vote, please speak as to whether you are in favor or against of the DeMarco amendment.
Speaking in favor of the DeMarco amendment, just want to say this first of all, most of my voice, so bear with me. I believe if all of the wording pertinent to the RSAs had been put into the original warrant article, suggesting that the selectmen could in fact touch this money in any way, shape, or form, it never would have passed. I spoke earlier on about issues that we have, putting warrants out there that later on give us a little bit of a legal debacle, and I'd like to see us have a little bit more care to that end. Second of all, we are assuming there is this pot of money, to use a word that has been already used tonight, grab. There is no extra money to grab. We have gone on at length, time and time and time again, already we're going into evening, but already today, saying how this one particular department is on demand and short on coverage. The coverage can come out of this fund, which would bring us to where we need, or would set us on a better course of where we should be. You are not saving money when you do not spend it. If I go out and buy paper and have $1 in my hand and get the paper that I need for 80 cents, I've saved 20 cents. If I do not buy the paper and put that $1 in my pocket instead, that's not a savings. I never got what I needed. We're not getting what we need. We're not getting the spirit of what these warrant articles are meant for. What do we touch next? Gentlemen, and I'm addressing the Board of Selectmen, if there are things that this community needs, if there is a reason to grab at this money and take it away from a department that's in need, or any department for that matter, then those expenses should be put in your budget. And they should be represented to this community as things that we truly need, instead of playing this shell game making yourselves look good by saying you've saved all this money when you haven't done and purchased and given this town the services that they need. And we have what I see through all of this today, this year more than any year, a shell game going on that in a couple of years we're going to be saying, where is the money? Who has the money? We don't know where the money is. So, Mr. DeMarco, I'm in favor of your amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Latimer.
Bob?
Ms. Latimer made reference to the evening, and we are slipping that way. So, this is my suggestion to all who approach the microphone. We are on Article 23, just over halfway through our slate of business for the day, or the evening, whatever the case may be. So please, if someone has stood up here and articulated the position in which you're in favor of, think, do I need to say that exact same thing, or has the message been communicated to the body? Mr. Traynor.
First off, I'm totally in favor of the motion by Mr. DeMarco. I do want to address a couple things that Selectman Zanoy made in his opening statement. We did discuss the EMS fund at our Budget Committee meeting. And at the time, he stated there was almost $500,000 in the fund that was surplus extra money. And we pointed out to the selectmen that 2 years ago, we didn't buy an ambulance. So there's approximately $150,000 to $170,000 that didn't come out of the EMS fund then. This year, we just purchased one. It's the first one in 4 years for $172,000. But $68,000 additional funds came out of the EMS to reimburse the fireman's staffing fund. So when you take the two of those and you add them together, you get approximately $240,000, $245,000, which still leaves, granted, almost $200,000, but you're still missing the point. You're only running one ambulance at a time. We have 3 ambulances, one is a backup, a total backup. But this town has enough paramedics that have spent money for training and facilitating their skills to man 2 ambulances out of this EMS fund. Because sooner or later, as legal counsel and many of the selectmen have said today about lawsuits and everything else, sooner or later a tragedy is going to happen and it's going to come back and bite you, the town, and the taxpayers. It's about time the EMS fund was used for the ambulance and the staffing of the ambulance of what the money is collected. It is not costing the taxpayers one dime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Traynor. We're going to move our way through the line. Mr. Gaithel is next. We're going to end with Mr. Buck, and at that time, we're going to attempt to address the DeMarco amendment and the article as a whole. Mr. Gaithel.
David Gaithel, 23 Ridgeview Terrace, short and to the point. I'm opposed to the amendment. I'm opposed to it for one reason and one reason only. I don't want to see nonsense on the ballot. You just voted not to gut Article 38 and turn it into a nonsensical article. What you're doing with this is you're putting four or five words up there that make it seem to the voters like you're a bunch of idiots. You're turning it into nonsense. The selectmen have just as much right as petitioners to put an article on the ballot. Whether I agree with them or not is irrelevant at this moment. What I'm telling you is you insult the voters when you take something like this, you strike all the language, and you turn it into idiocy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaithel. Mr. Diner.
J. Diener, 206 Woodland Road. David expressed my opinions very well, so I'll save some time and pass.
Thank you, sir. Next.
Name's Larry Quinn, 18 Tuttle Avenue. I'm opposed to this amendment for the same reason it was so eloquently mentioned by on a previous article by Mr. Rice and Ms. Woolsey, and that is this: let the people vote. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Buck. Are you all set? Okay.
Mr. Nichols wanted to
I've had
speak.
my hand up.
Nichols, excuse me.
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of comments. One is, I kind of object to the terms grab, squirrel, shell game, whatever. I don't think that there's anything that even approaches those descriptions that myself or any of the other Board of Selectmen have been a part of. The second thing is the whole intent of this warrant article was to clarify language that was in the 2006 article. The most important point, and Mary Louise made it, related to 3195H, is 3195H specifically states all or any part of the revenues, of the EMS revenues. That was not clarified in Article 19 in 2006. One interpretation is that if the RSA 3195H states that, and there's nothing in the article that specifies any, all, or any part of, then the selectmen have the flexibility to direct all or any part of. We looked at that and we said, no, we'd like to have the voters have a chance on this, okay? So we'll produce the language and put it to the voters. It probably should have been there in the first place. As far as the fund and the motivation for doing it, and squirrel, grab, shell game, whatever, okay? The selectmen have, for the 2 years that I've been on this, exercised no influence whatsoever in how the money in that EMS fund is spent. That has been totally a function of the fire chief and the finance director, and I, or to the best of my knowledge, any of the other selectmen have never even had a conversation on that subject. But what we saw happening is we saw an amount of money building in that fund, okay? And until such time as we made a recent ambulance purchase, it was headed towards $500,000 or $600,000. We said, this does not make sense. Much like Mary Louise made a statement earlier about money that could have been applied to the tax rate last time, we said it makes no sense to let $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 sit in a fund, okay, when by making a decision prior to that with some direction of the finance director of what flows to the general fund versus what flows to the EMS fund, we can keep the fund at a level that is necessary. We asked the town manager, what level of that is necessary? And Fred indicated to us $170,000, $175,000, which is the cost of an ambulance. As long as we always keep a minimal amount of money in there that is the cost of the ambulance, then we're fine, okay? The only way, if we direct revenues to the general fund as opposed to the EMS fund, the only way those revenues can be used is to reduce the tax rate, period, okay? So that it's an effort to not let money accumulate beyond what is necessary and use it to reduce the tax rate. Well, what all the comments have turned into is really a different debate, okay? They've turned into, should we be spending more money on EMS and fire service, or should we be using it to reduce the tax rate? That's a different issue than the intent of this warrant article, which is to clarify the language, okay? Final comment I would make is, quite frankly, I don't understand the inconsistency of Mr. Rice and Mrs. Woolsey, where it's a problem to do it on Article 38 and take away the right of the voters, but it's okay to do it here. I just don't understand that.
No, I'm going to go out. I'm going to go out to the audience. I had missed Mr. Nichols earlier, and the board's had a proponent and an opportunity to speak. I'm going to go out to the audience here. All of those in favor of the DeMarco amendment, which would reduce Article 23 to simply the words that appear. All in blue will be stricken. All those in favor of the DeMarco amendment, raise your voter card. Down cards. All those opposed to the DeMarco amendment. I declare the DeMarco amendment has passed. Yes. Now, the article is as amended. We have discussed this quite a bit.
We have a division. Did 5 more people say yeah on a division on that?
Well, I will accede to Mr. Moody. If I can have my assistants, and we'll get this done once and for all. If I could have my assistant moderators at the front of the room, and we'll retake that vote, and we'll get a specific count. No, I'm going to do it on the discretion of the moderator to satisfy those in the room that we've got a accurate determination on the DeMarco amendment.
I'm sitting next to you.
Middle?
Where do you want me to do? Go ahead.
You ready? Yeah. All right. I'm going to ask your indulgence. You're going to leave your voter cards up, whether you're voting yes or no, until these folks can give you the signal to put them down. All those in favor of the DeMarco amendment, which would strike all language except for the word shall the town of Hampton vote, raise your voter card.
Keep your hands up. Tell me when you're going to count.
9, 10.
10 all the way up?
10.
That's in favor. Is that in favor?
It's like a robbery in another way.
Oh, sorry, sorry. You got me. 10. Yeah.
Put them down.
Mr. Kilroy, you ready for the vote in the negative? All those opposed to the DeMarco amendment, please raise your voter card. And Mr. Kilroy, make sure you get the stage this time.
Don't forget the people in the back.
Yes. 16.
Results on the DeMarco amendment, 43 in favor, 32 opposed. I declare that the DeMarco amendment has passed. Let's move on to Article
Strict reconsideration?
24. Motion to restrict reconsideration of Article 23 by Ms. Woolsey, seconded by Mr. Buck. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 23, raise your voter card. Down cards. All opposed? Article 23 has been restricted. Article 24, shall the town of Hampton vote to amend the solid waste ordinance adopted under Article 33 of the 2009 annual town meeting as follows, by adding the following new subsection 4B9 after subsection 4B8. 4B9, the town may extend cooperative use of equipment, personnel, and facilities to other municipalities or contracted solid waste firms doing business with the town for the purpose of cooperatively marketing, handling, and shipping of recycled materials at no cost to the town of Hampton. The Board of Selectmen may permit such use following a public hearing. Passage of this article will allow the town to join cooperatively with other towns and recycling solid waste businesses in order to more effectively dispose of collected recycled materials without additional cost to the town. And by amending subsection 4A4 by deleting from the words, quote, without charge, end quote, and substituting therefore the words, quote, in accordance with such charges as determined by the Board of Selectmen, end quote, so that refuse deposited by the state of New Hampshire may be charged for as determined by the Board of Selectmen, majority vote required. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 24.
And
moved by
second.
Mr. Lally, seconded by Mr. Bateman. Mr. Lally, would you like to speak to Article 24?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, the town manager has done a lot of work on this.
Mr. Welch.
It's not on.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, please.
As requested by Mr. Lally. The first section of this was drafted at my request. We have been busily negotiating a cooperative agreement with the Concord Co-op for single-stream recycling, which we hope will go into effect sometime later this year. It appears they are going to build their facility from our last go-around with them. In doing that, we've been approached by other municipalities in this general area of the state who we work with constantly on recycling matters. Those municipalities have asked us if we would consider having them join with us in order to ship materials, for which they would pay overhead costs, expenses based upon a tonnage basis. We are charged by everyone on a tonnage basis for handling solid waste, regardless of whether it goes to Turnkey in Rochester or whether it goes to a recycling cooperative. This would allow the board, after a public hearing, and their satisfaction that everything is operating correctly, to allow the town to cooperatively merge with these other municipalities for the purpose of efficiency and scale in getting rid of recycled materials.
It's typical 4-to-1.
Second half of this, I was asked to draft by the board to remove the without charge provision within the current ordinance that allows the state to deposit material at the facility, a regular solid waste material at the town facility without charge. The board would like to enter into an agreement, as they have attempted to do before with DRED, to come to some decision on how that would be handled, and this would give them the authority to do that.
Raise some money rather quick.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. Mr. Warburg.
Not what she's giving himself.
Mr. Moderator, I don't really enjoy getting up every other article, it seems, in the last couple, but just for the record, I had no knowledge or conversation about Article 24. And I do want to remind the public that for 2 years in a row, Hampton Beach has been voted one of the top beaches in the country. And yours truly and his 38% less staff pick up over 4,000, let me repeat, 4,000 tons of trash on Hampton Beach. We put out more barrels. Our staff does it. 2 shifts till midnight. We take the trash to the transfer station. On none of this trash do we generate anything. And once again, the Board of Selectmen, and I'd like to ask if I don't know if any of them are not talking or they can't talk or what, why would anybody think of doing this when we're all one community? The Public Works Department in this town that I work with so closely does a great job. However, after 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I pick up all the trash 7 nights a week. And before I get, Mr. Moderator, before I forget, we've heard a lot of conversation at the public hearings, and if you didn't know anybody, you thought we only had one department in town, that being Public Works. But I want to publicly thank Chief Jamie Sullivan of the Hampton Police Department, his men and women, Chief Chris Silva, his men and women, Diana Martin, the Rec Department. I work very closely with all of those agencies, and you should all be very proud of the work that they do. These guys on the street, with the boots on the street, I'm with every day and night. They see the trash issues, they see what we do. I'm just appalled, as your state official, that I have to come to this meeting, and we now have a thing where you're going to charge something that I do out of the goodness, and I pay for the entire expense. Another example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warburton. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Mr. Moody.
I was appalled to find out the state wasn't paying for trash that they pick up on their property. When we closed the dump in the mid-90s and built the transfer station with eventually 2 compactors and had to haul it to Rochester, the state parks, whoever was in charge, wasn't Mr. Warburton because he was a selectman, but he's in charge now of the Seacoast Dread. He's an employee of the state. They pled with us to come into our transfer station. 4 cents a pound, I think, something like that. And we bought scales, which we had the scales at the end of the dump, at the end of the life of the dump, too. We moved the scales over to the transfer station. We've probably replaced them by now. But they were charged. I saw the bills every month, and they paid. So when last year I saw that ordinance, that they're free, wow, 4,000 tons, he said? What was that, $200,000 it cost us for tipping fees? And this, and I don't, well, I really, I saw one of his trucks come out of Northampton this summer, full of bags of trash, and start collecting along the seawall in North Beach. It's a crime to bring trash into this town and dispose it on the transfer station. It used to be a $1,000 fine. I think we made it $500 last year. But I can't believe that we're paying a state expense.
$66 a ton?
And we should be charging, they should be glad that we are offering this service. When the state ordered all towns and cities to join a solid waste district by a certain date in the late 80s, 1988, I think, state law was passed concerning Hampton, allowing the division of, well, the Seacoast, whatever it's called, Division of Recreation and Parks of DRED, Department of Economic Development, to join together into a solid waste district. That's still on the books. Are you trying to tell me that each party wasn't going to pay for their own trash? The great expense of compacting, traveling to Rochester and paying a tipping fee. As it is, I don't believe the state pays anything for sewage treatment for all the bathrooms, and there are 3 new bathrooms, so 4. They should be paying this as an expense of doing business. As far as picking up some of Hampton trash, that was a town manager thing in the 60s that, to save us overtime, they agreed to pick up some barrels at certain times to save town overtime. And apparently they're still doing it, according to the previous speaker. But this is only fair that this happens, that they be charged a reasonable fee, what it costs us, because otherwise they would have to be transporting, they would have to find a way to get rid of their trash.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Representative Stiles.
I would like to move an amendment to Article 24 by removing all language after cost to the town in the first bullet. Oh, no, excuse me. I meant the second bullet is what I want to get rid of. And the word "and."
You want majority vote required, I think, Nancy. Nancy, you want majority vote required to stay, right?
Pardon me?
You want majority vote required to stay.
So you're trying, Representative Stiles, you're asking that Article 24 be amended by deleting the second bullet point, and to Attorney Gerald's point, but leaving the instruction that a majority vote is required to pass.
Thank you for that correction.
Is there a second to Representative Stiles? Seconded by Mr. Warburton.
And I will speak to my motion.
Please.
I think that since we just received $14.5 million from the state to do work at the beach, let's give us a couple of years to see how much trash that generates. I mean, we've been trying to work together with the town and the state to do what is best for our area to support our businesses down there. There currently is a bill in the House that is looking to partner with the town and DRED and share revenues if we can get that through. So I would ask that you support this amendment and hold off charging the state for at least a couple of years.
Like to speak to the amendment?
Well, I've been raising my hand for 5 or 10 minutes now, and it relates to the amendment.
Well, Mr. Nichols, what I'm going to suggest is if there's somebody on the Board of Selectmen who wants to speak to the article, okay, that person should be identified. I think I went out to the proponent. So you folks need to work among yourselves or pass the message
Right,
down.
but to some extent, it's a response to comments that come up during the discussion.
Well, we got an amendment on the floor, which is the Stiles Amendment. If you'd like to speak to the Stiles Amendment, you have the floor.
Okay. I would just like to comment that it is not the intent of this amendment to immediately go out and start charging the state for trash, okay? This was triggered based on the fact that the town has instituted mandatory recycling. And what we've done by, in our own ordinances, from restricting ourselves from charging the state, have eliminated any ability to negotiate if the state comes back and says, we're sorry, we just don't have the funds, we can't do your mandatory recycling. This was discussed, I'm sorry Brian was surprised, because this was discussed on at least 3 occasions at Board of Selectmen's meetings. And I remember specifically stating, in the context of, we need to make sure that Brian gets the support from the state for funding that he deserves, okay? It's got nothing to do with the job that Brian and his crew do in terms of cleaning up, and there is no intention with this to immediately go in and charge the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Mr. Nyan.
John Nyan, 4 Penniman Lane. It's been interesting. I've been watching, be it here or at home on TV, most of the events today, and it's always interesting, as one gentleman said earlier, that this is a true form of democracy, and people have opinions, and in sometimes opinions who you would think you would be in favor with, you end up being against, and then those that you thought you were against, you were with. So, interesting enough, on this particular amendment, I would have to support the Stiles Amendment on this, purely because of what I would consider partnership. As you know, I've been involved with the Hampton Beach Area Commission, and that we have successfully brought to the town of Hampton and the state park over $14.5 million state money to improve Hampton Beach. We are also in the process now, with the assistance of the state, close to another $12 million of both federal and state funding for different other aspects of Hampton Beach. Saying that, I have seen from the time that I started the campaign about the beach, and the reason why we got the $14.5 million was a partnership, that the town and the state worked together. And being down on the beach a fair amount of time during the summer, and knowing that both the town and the state participated in keeping the beach clean, that to me showed that there was this partnership. I think it would not be in the best interest of the town of Hampton right now, this year, to suggest a fee structure to the state of New Hampshire, especially since they have come to us on a number of occasions over this past year to say, we're willing to partner with you to bring in dollars that's going to benefit the town of Hampton and the Hampton Beach area. So I speak in favor of the Stiles Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nyan. Gaethel.
David Gaethel, 23 Ridgeview Terrace. I'm not in favor or opposed. I actually have a question. By striking the second bullet, what is that effect? What is the effect of that on the first bullet? It appears to me that the 2 bullets are tied together, and that, as an example, if you strike the second one, you may not be able to enforce recycling, solid waste, etc. So I'd just like to have a ruling on whether or not striking the second bullet ties the hands of the town on the first bullet.
Someone from the board who would like to, or the manager would like to address Mr. Gaithel's question.
Mr. Moderator, it does not tie the town's hands if you strike the second bullet as far as recycling is concerned.
Okay, so if you wish to have the state as an example, recycled materials, you can still require that they do it if they bring
Yes, that's a
material to
separate
the
article
transfer
under
station.
the ordinance.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Lally.
Let me see if this one, does this one work?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to vote for Mrs. Stiles' amendment in the spirit of cooperation. But I just want to say a few things about the state. Over the past year, we've been given unfunded mandates by the state of New Hampshire in reference to retirement costs, you name it, health care, right down the line, trash. I think that we're getting to the point in town government and municipalities in the state where we have to say no to the state. And whereas we don't have home rule, that's difficult to do. But I will cede on this one on behalf of cooperation, just as I think in the same spirit of the cemetery trustees and people who brought back the article probably could have sat down a few more times and hammered that one out. So in that spirit of cooperation, I will vote for Mrs. Stiles' amendment.
Mr. Griffin.
I also am in favor of Mrs. Stiles' amendment. I'd just like to say that.
Mr. Moody, Mr. Gopalan, and then we will call the Stiles amendment.
I call the state, the state in this matter has been a thief for a number of years. Criminals by not paying it. Maybe it was the last town manager. I don't know who arranged it. But we heard earlier that we bought 100,000, well, I don't know how much it cost, a sweeper. 80%, the only reason we originally bought Everest sweeper was the state's Ocean Boulevard. Every day in the summer, 7 days a week, using the town sweeper to sweep the state property, including their parking spaces, their metered parking spaces. Now, the deed from the town to the state in 1933, which is word for word in a state statute of 1933, says that the state is responsible for windblown sand and other debris on their property. So why are we buying $100,000 sweepers and hiring a summer crew, usually teenagers, just like the cemetery workers will be, maybe? Why are we doing that? Why don't we stop that? I'm wondering if the dread for officials above Mr. Warburton knows that he is speaking for them. I'm kind of wondering. And who's to stop them from bringing in him from out of town, which is against the ordinance? We suspended the state once for a month because they were bringing in from out of town. Even when they built the visitor center on the Colonial Mansion in Portsmouth, they were bringing in their limit of 200 pounds of wood a day in January. That's illegal, but they were doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Mr. Gopalan, and then the Stiles amendment.
While I don't have particular sentiment one way or the other about the amendment itself, I think the amendment should have time limit. The reason why I say that is cooperation is two-way street. What I see is that the last year, the state arbitrarily imposed from 35% to 30%, they withdrew the retirement funding, which is going to devolve on us. Same way, when they did away with the sharing of the rooms and meals tax, that imposed additional burden. So I'm all for cooperation. And on top of that, we also have a compact with the state to take care of all the roads and so forth, state roads within our boundaries, which is going to cost us enormous amount of money. I would like to see more cooperation. Cooperation has to be two-way street. And I suggest that we make this as a 2-year time limit, and negotiate with the state to be more equitable in all those other areas. To Mr. Lally's point, I think we have come to a point where we have to say no to the state. By the way, who the state is? The state is just us, the taxpayers. The state is not in business earning money and developing it. It is the taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer, you are a taxpayer. It's just a question of whether you are paying to the local community or to the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopal. This time, I'd like to have a vote on the Stiles Amendment. It's on the screen. If you're voting yes, you're voting in favor of the Stiles Amendment, which is deleting the second bullet point of Article 24. All those in favor of the Stiles Amendment, raise your voter card. Down card. All opposed to the Stiles Amendment. I declare the Stiles Amendment has passed. Article 24 has been amended, and we have discussed it at length. And seeing no further action, we'll move on to Article 25, and Article 24 will appear on the warrant as amended. Mr. Trainer.
Can I make one comment, because my name was brought
up? No, I understand, Brian, but if we go that circle, Mr. Trainer. Mr. Trainer, did you have a point?
I was going to restrict any more deliberation on 24.
Second.
There's been a motion by Mr. Trainer to restrict reconsideration, seconded by Ms. Woolsey on Article 24. All in favor? Down cards? All opposed? 24 is restricted. We're on to 25. To see if the town of Hampton will vote pursuant to NHRSA 41:11-A, Roman 3, to authorize the Board of Selectmen to rent or lease municipal property for a term of up to 5 years without further vote or ratification of the town. Once adopted, this authority shall remain in effect until specifically rescinded by the town meeting at a duly warned meeting, provided that the term of any lease entered into prior to the rescission shall remain in effect. Majority vote required. Note, currently the Board of Selectmen has the authority under RSA 41:11-A2 to rent or lease real property owned by the town during periods not needed for public use, but any rental or lease agreement for a period of more than 1 year is not valid unless ratified by vote of the town at town meeting. Passage of this article would provide the Board of Selectmen with the added flexibility afforded by the longer period of rental authority without town meeting ratification that is allowed by state legislation enacted in 2009. I'll entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 25. Moved by Mr. Griffin. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Lally. Mr. Griffin, would you like to speak to the article?
Basically, it's pretty much how it reads. You know, we're just looking to be able to do it for up to 5 years. Lease town property.
Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 25? Mr. Lupley?
Mark Lupley, 7 Carlson Road. Would this include town parking lots and town land?
It does, doesn't it, Mr. Welch?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thanks.
But it would not include highway property.
Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 25? Mr. Moody?
The last time before the law was changed last year, we excluded the town-owned leased land under the 1982 leased land sales program as defined in a special town meeting in December '83. I think it was '83. It would be pretty awkward if that included that land in this article. Public hearing?
Anyone else on Article 25?
I have a comment on that.
Mrs. Zanoy.
Yeah, I think when we saw this article, what was discussed was that there may be an opportunity for us to rent or lease town land or property, and property that may need to be improved or upgraded. And we felt that any significant improvement or upgrade, if the lease was only 1 year, might discourage whoever wants to rent or lease the property. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility in that area.
Thank you, Mr. Zanoy. Anyone else wishing to be heard on Article 25? Ms. Sanford?
Diandra Sanford, 34 Langdale Drive. I just was wondering if you could give me some clarification on liability responsibilities as far as insurance.
Anyone who can address Ms. Sanford's question about liability associated with leasing of town property?
Mr. Moderator, we currently require someone who leases real property to maintain insurance policies, indemnifying the town, as well as indemnifying themselves, of course, if something should occur on the property. Certainly on buildings, they're required to have fire insurance and other things of that nature if they're renting a building from the town.
Okay, and to what amount is that?
It'll depend upon the structure and what they're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Gerald?
Yes, Mr. Moody makes a good point. Some years ago, the townspeople passed RSA 4114A, which allows the selectmen to sell or acquire real estate, not lease it. And at that time, that particular article specifically exempted the land that is subject to the 1982 town meeting vote on leased land at Hampton Beach. And so it may be appropriate to clarify this particular article, that this article does not in fact cover that particular program, the leased land sales program, because we do have that special type of program in Hampton, one of the few in the state, and just so there's no confusion.
Well, I leave that to the board or to anyone else in the room if that's going to be clarified by way of an amendment. Otherwise, we're dealing with Article 25 as printed. Anyone else on Article 25? Seeing none, Article 25 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 26, shall the town of Hampton vote to accept as a Class 5 town road the 30-foot wide access road to the treatment plant and public works as currently traveled that runs northeasterly for approximately 843 feet from the easterly side of Tide Mill Road to the existing steel gate, and including the shaded area of current public usage adjacent to Tide Mill Road, all as shown on a plan of land access road to the treatment plant, Assessor's Parcel 241-012 by James Vera and Associates, dated January 6, 2010, and without any payment of damages by the town, and to discontinue as a town road those portions of the proposed taking for right-of-way as deeded to the town by deed of Charles H. Brown, dated July 31, 1933, in Book 890, page 432, that encroach upon Tax Map 241, Lot 2, and Tax Map 241, Lot 3, as shaded on the said January 6, 2010 plan by James Vera and Associates. Again, without any payment of damages by the town, and with quitclaim deeds of said encroaching portions to be executed by the Board of Selectmen to the respective owners of Tax Map 241, Lot 2, and Tax Map 241, Lot 3, at no expense to the town. Majority vote required. Note, this article relates to the opening of the gates to the transfer station. This article does not address the driveway known as Hard Arts Way. I entertain a motion to open discussion on Article 26, moved by Mr. Nichols. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Zanoy. Mr. Nichols, would you like to speak to Article 26?
Yes, I would. 2 years ago, in 2008, there was a petition warrant article requesting that the gates at the end of Hard Arts Way be opened. During the course of investigating all the different issues associated with doing this, a combination of the manager and the town attorney identified a problem. That problem being the segment of road that runs from the east end of Tide Mill Road in a northerly direction to the gates is not located where it's supposed to be located based on a deed going back to, I believe, 1935, Mark? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
33.
1933. So essentially, the situation that exists is there's a deed that says that portion of road is supposed to be going on a path that I believe actually carries it into the building, one of the buildings owned by those two property owners, as opposed to where the road actually is. What this article is looking for is the authority to essentially negotiate with the actually two property owners down there changes to the deed such that the deeds reflect where the road actually is, and the intent would be at no cost to the town and at no cost to the property owners. In the interest of disclosure, this is a problem unto itself, but I think people should know this is part of an intention to be responsive to that 2008 voter petition to open those gates.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Before I get to Ms. Woolsey, the folks who are recording this and operating Channel 22 have asked us to take a pause for about a minute in order for them to make whatever changes and adjustments they need to make because of how long we have gone. So with that, I'm going to recess just for a couple of minutes to allow them to attend to that technical work, and then we will get to the article with Ms. Woolsey at the podium.
Yes. I'm sorry, can you? Yes. Okay. No, it's